Chapter 3085. Wake Up! The Seven Disciples of the Human Ancestor. Emperor Xiaoyao opened his arms. A black mist of chaotic energy gushed out of his body and entered the nostrils of the seven emperors. Then, they opened their eyes, including Emperor Qing. However, the difference was that their eyes were no longer the dim yellow of the imperial heaven and earth. Instead, they were black. In those black eyes, there was a mixture of anger, sorrow, resentment, and injustice. All the negative emotions that should be in the world were contained in those eyes. Finally, we succeeded, Emperor Xiaoyao said slowly. It was rumored that the seven emperors had reached the state of immortality. Even the emperor could not kill them, so he could only imprison them in the heavenly law prison. That was just a rumor. If the human ancestor could be killed, why couldn't his seven disciples be killed? It was not that they could not be killed, but Emperor Xiaoyao did not want to. Instead of paying a huge price to destroy all of them, why not make use of them and transform them into seven peerlessly powerful weapons of the human world? The huge eye on the ground gathered the negative emotions that the sacred mountain had collected from the countless beings of destroyed civilizations over the years. It contained the darkness of those beings before they died. After years of brewing in the holy mountain, the dark emotions had become a strong poison that could corrode people's hearts. After a long period of time, it could poison the soul, turn one's mind dark, and enslave them. The seven emperors knew Emperor Xiaoyao's intention. So, not long after they were captured, they immediately fell into a coma. In this way, the dark emotions could not affect their souls. An era had passed, and they managed to hold on. Although the dark emotions still had a subtle influence on them, they did not completely control them, until Su Yu's arrival woke them up from their deep sleep. Then, they were immediately plotted against by Emperor Xiaoyao, who quickly turned them dark and enslaved them successfully. Emperor Xiaoyao raised his hand and grabbed. The giant eye embedded in the ground immediately shattered like a mirror, turning into seven small fragments. With a flick of his finger, each fragment shot into the space between the eyebrows of one of the emperors and merged with them. In this way, they were completely controlled by the mirror fragments and indirectly enslaved by Emperor Xiaoyao. However, the speed of merging the fragments was quite slow. It seemed like it would take at least a year. A cold smile appeared on Prince Xiaoyao's gloomy face. Su Yu, oh Su Yu, you will realize that the strongest humans you have to defeat in order to become the king of humans are none other than the seven former students of the human ancestor. Far away from the heavenly law prison, the exhausted little skeleton stopped and landed on a rock. It's similar to me. Su Yu jumped down from its back. As he quietly adjusted his breathing and recovered his strength, he cast a sidelong glance at the little skeleton who had transformed into a lion and asked, "Are you Emperor Qing's mount?" He had never expected that the skeleton he had randomly rescued in the first level of the Heavenly Tao prison would be the Azure Thearka's mount. The lion shook his furry head. "What? I'm so handsome and mighty. Don't I look like one?" Su Yu was not in the mood to joke around. His mind was recalling the scene of him meeting the seven emperors, and his heart was filled with emotions. He didn't go to the heavenly law prison for anything, nor did he have anyone to remind him. He just wanted to take a look at this place out of respect for the human ancestor. He did not expect that what awaited him would be the human ancestor's inheritance. Did the human ancestor predict that I would come to the heavenly law prison? Su Yu muttered. The little skeleton panted, lying on the ground. How could the human ancestor be so powerful that he could predict what would happen an epoch later? He did not even know that the seven emperors would be arrested. However, if the successor he chose did not even have the heart to search for his seven former disciples, he would not have the right to inherit his inheritance. Hearing this, Su Yu suddenly understood. Turned out that this was also a test. It was a test of Su Yu's respect for the bloodline of the human ancestor. If he did not, he would never obtain the golden key to unlock the inheritance. After pausing for a moment, the lion said sadly. Also, the Azure-Tharch asked me to tell you not to show mercy when your abilities reach that level one day. Suyu raised his eyebrows. The Azure-Tharch himself had said the same thing to him. What does that mean? He asked, puzzled. The lion's eyes were filled with sadness, and it sobbed. I will answer you when you become the human king. It is meaningless to tell you now. The Azure-Tharch was telling Suyu not to show mercy when he saw them in their dark forms in the future. He had to kill them. Suyu did not pursue the matter. Instead, he looked at the lion and asked, What should I call you? The lion thought for a moment, then twisted its body and turned back into a jade skeleton. Just call me Little Skeleton. I was a lion in my previous life, but I am a skeleton in this life. Suyu's heart skipped a beat. Previous life and this life? Do you mean the previous life before you entered the world of returning ruins? At the level of the little skeleton's cultivation, there should not be any concept of previous life and this life. The little skeleton blinked its eyes, which were burning with ghostly flames. What are you thinking about? What I mean is that I cultivated from a little lion to a little skeleton. During that time, I underwent a complete transformation. It can be said to be my previous life and this life. Suyu was greatly disappointed. It seemed like there were no shortcuts in the world of returning ruins. Protect me. He closed his eyes and sped up the recovery of his body. Little did he know that after he closed his eyes, the little skeleton tilted its head and secretly glanced at Suyu. Its ghostly flames were shining brightly. 2 days later, Suyu opened his eyes abruptly. His gaze, which had materialized, was like 2 bolts of lightning striking the heavens, scattering the clouds for thousands of miles. After this trip, the power of the heavenly law in his body had become much purer, and it had reached the peak of the middle stage of the heavenly law master. It would soon be the first stage of the late stage of the heavenly law master, the ancient saint. Clap, clap. Right at that moment, the crisp sound of applause reached his ears. Looking sideways, Suyu was unperturbed. He frowned and said, You are haunting me. At the riverside not far away from them, a beautiful young girl was sitting by the river, her snow-white feet swaying in the water. She clapped her hands and said, Not bad, you have improved. But don't forget the time, you still have 2 days left. Suyu's expression was calm as he replied calmly, I thought you had died in the heavenly law prison. You are really lucky. Back then, the Qing Emperor's gaze had created a world-destroying wave. It was a pity that it had failed to harm the first ancestor of the Soul Saint clan. If you are not dead, what about me? The first ancestor looked pleased. The little skeleton, who was sleeping on the ground, suddenly overheard the conversation. Looking sideways, it was shocked. Hey! Kid, you must tell me that you have no grudge against this lady. It seemed like the little skeleton knew her. Suyu said regretfully, We do not have any grudge, but she will kill me in 2 days. The little skeleton's face became uglier than a pig's intestines. With a sullen face, he said, Master, can't you take it easy with your tiny body? Why did you provoke all those old big shots? When the first ancestor of the Soul Saint clan dominated the 9-star civilizations, the little skeleton was still in its mother's womb. End of this chapter. Chapter 3086. The little skeleton said with a sad face, Why am I so unlucky? He had finally escaped from the heavenly law prison, but now he had to follow a dying master. Suyu said calmly, You don't have time to talk. You'd better hurry. He leaped onto Little Skeleton's back and surveyed his surroundings. Who in this vast world could be a match for an expert of the 10,000 Saints realm? After thinking about it, Suyu fixed his eyes on the road where he came from. Songtian Mountain. Go. Suyu's eyes lit up. There was only one person in this world who could save him, himself. If he tried to rely on others to save him, he would eventually die. The little skeleton transformed into a lion and immediately flew toward the Songtian Mountain. It had been sealed for an era, so its strength was much weaker. Although it was rushing with all its strength, it couldn't recover to its previous state. Looking back, the first ancestor of the young girl was riding on a cloud, following him at a steady pace. She didn't try to distance herself from him at all. "Master, do you have any way to help me recover? If I can recover to my peak, I'm sure I can get rid of this B***tch," the little skeleton said. "You?" Su didn't expect the little skeleton to be able to get rid of her. After all, even if the little skeleton recovered to its peak, it was only a great saint. The first ancestor was a living all-saint. The gap between them was too big. Master, don't look down on me. Since I was chosen as a mount by the Qing Emperor, I must be good at body techniques," the little skeleton said confidently. Su nodded secretly. Indeed, the Qing Emperor would never choose a mount based on appearance. Moreover, the little skeleton didn't have a single hair from head to toe. "Give me some time." Su closed his eyes again. The little skeleton had been weak for too long. It couldn't be recovered immediately by replenishing a bit of the strength of the heavenly law master. It would take more than 10 years to fully recover. However, Su was different from ordinary people. He had an ability that others didn't have. The 8 great domains, which had evolved a bit of the absolute beginning force. He sat with his legs crossed, and a giant emerald tree appeared behind him, emitting a hazy emerald light that enveloped the little skeleton. This was the recovery of injuries in the life domain. However, when the emerald light fell on the little skeleton, it passed through his body, leaving only a faint golden shimmer in his body to repair his dried body. A grave look appeared on Su's face. "I need half a day." The soul domain no longer had any effect on his body. Only the absolute beginning force could repair it. Half a day. The little skeleton was so shocked that his tongue almost fell off. He was just joking, and he really didn't expect Su to cure his body. The little skeleton was well aware of the state of his body. It wasn't something that could be recovered by ordinary energy. Even when the lotus tharch woke up, he didn't help it recover its body. It was not that the azure tharch did not want to. It was just that he could not do it. Otherwise, he would not sit back and do nothing. How could Su accomplish something that even the Qing Emperor couldn't? It couldn't believe it at all. Su remained silent as he continued to instill the domain of life into the little skeleton's body. The power of the domain flowed out of the little skeleton's body, but the absolute beginning force remained. As time passed, more and more primordial force remained, nourishing the little skeleton's body. Little skeleton finally sensed the changes in his body. He could feel the energy of the Lord of the Tao accumulating in his body. His eyes were bursting with ecstasy and astonishment as he exclaimed, "It really works! Ha 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 ha, I, the Fire Cloud Demonic Emperor, will soon return to the world." Little skeleton laughed heartily. The corners of Su's mouth twitched, and he almost woke up from his healing state. What? The Fire Cloud Demonic Emperor? He vaguely remembered that there was an existence called the Fire Cloud Demonic God back on Earth. Su looked back. The first ancestor was following behind him at a moderate speed. When her eyes met Su's, she said calmly, "There are still 16 hours left. That would be the time for her to take Su's life." Su felt a chill in his heart. He did not dare to hesitate any longer. He immediately sped up and tried his best to heal the little skeleton. After the little skeleton's body had recovered a part of it, he turned around and shouted fiercely, "Bitch, come and catch me!" As he spoke, his limbs were suddenly surrounded by flames. As he ran, the flames burned through the space. It was almost as if he was running across space. His speed was several times faster than Su's space domain. The first ancestor, who was chasing after the little skeleton slowly, frowned slightly. Sky burning shadow. This is the top technique of the human race in the past, isn't it? A hint of seriousness appeared on her face. She quickened her pace and caught up with the little skeleton again. When she looked back, she secretly grinned. Damn it, this old woman is much stronger than she was back then. An era ago, her strength was still limited. Now, she had broken through to the point where she was not much weaker than Emperor Qing. If he wanted to escape from her hands, he would have to put in a lot of effort. After a few hours, Su Yu's continuous infusion of the primordial force finally made the little skeleton fully recover. It took a deep breath, and its body rapidly expanded like a rubber ball, its whole body burning with raging flames. Let's try and catch up again. The little skeleton rolled on the spot, rolling in the void like a rubber ball. Wherever it passed, the space collapsed violently. Its speed was extraordinary, and it had reached more than 10 times that of Su Yu's space domain. The first ancestor's beautiful eyes flashed, and a layer of pitch-black All Saints power condensed on the surface of her body. Her movement technique had reached the extreme, but she still could not catch up with the little skeleton. The distance between the two of them was getting farther and farther. Noticing the scene behind him, Su Yu breathed a sigh of relief and secretly marveled. This was indeed the mount of Emperor Qing. Although the way it ran was not very elegant, its speed through space was really beyond imagination. No matter how superior the first ancestor's strength was, she was no match for the little skeleton's movement technique. However, Su Yu understood that he was not out of danger yet. The little skeleton's speed was indeed fast, but it could not run forever. There would come a day when its strength would be exhausted. As expected, half a day later, the little skeleton's speed had obviously dropped by 10%, and she was panting. Master, I can't hold on any longer. Have we reached the Tsangtian mountain that you mentioned? Su Yu shook his head. There is still at least half of the journey. Based on the constantly decreasing speed, he might not be able to reach the Tsangtian mountain before the first ancestor caught up. And the time he had left was only 1 day. Master, does the Tsangtian mountain have a way to deal with that old woman? The little skeleton thought hard, but could not remember such a powerful place as the Tsangtian mountain in his memory. Could it be a place where a new superpower had appeared in the previous era? I'm not sure, Su Yu said lightly. He was just guessing, but he was not sure. Ah. Then why did you go straight to the Tsangtian mountain? If you really got caught up, even the gods of the great Luo would not be able to save you, the little skeleton said in surprise. Su Yu shook his head. Apart from that, we have no other choice. Suddenly, Su Yu's eyes swept down and caught a glimpse of a familiar area. His eyes lit up slightly. Maybe we can stop for a while. Please remember the original domain name of this book. Mobile version website. Chapter 3087. There was a blue lake there, which was embedded in the ground. Countless creatures were passing through it, and it was extremely busy. Not long ago, Su Yu had narrowly escaped from this place. This was the Heavenly Law Alliance. Thanks to Elder Han, although Su Yu had obtained the Heavenly Law prison mission, he had become enemies with the Heavenly Law Alliance, so he could no longer use the Yin-Yang Gate. Since I'm passing by, I'll take what I deserve. Su Yu jumped into the lake and entered the Heavenly Law Alliance. The lake's barrier immediately sensed Su Yu's powerful presence, and it sounded a green alarm. In an instant, the news spread throughout the entire Heavenly Law Alliance. Strangely, there were very few people in the Heavenly Law Alliance. There were only a few members with average cultivations left. The elders of the Hall of Elders were all strong martial artists, but they had all disappeared without a trace. All that was left was an empty Heavenly Law Alliance. Su Yu's arrival had caused the members to flee in panic, without any power to retaliate. This was because Han Duanzu and the other elders had failed to kill Su Yu. They had mistakenly thought that they were trying to kill Heaven Mirrorflower's clone, so they would be attacked by the Holy Mountain. Hence, they had all retreated. When Su Yu arrived at the periphery of the Heavenly Law Alliance, there was a powerful formation that could not be seen with the naked eye. It had absorbed the energy of more than 10 eras, and its power could destroy the world. Back then, Su Yu and the others had only managed to escape by relying on a gap that Bai Shui had pointed out. They had not dared to force their way through. What an ancient formation! It must be at least 10 eras old. The little skeleton landed in front of the formation, its face filled with fear. The power of this formation is enough to make Emperor Qing suffer. After pausing for a moment, the little skeleton seemed to understand what Su Yu was thinking. It shook its head and said, however, "If you think that you can use this formation to attack that old woman, I'm afraid you are thinking too much. As long as she is not stupid, she will not force her way through this ancient formation." Su Yu's eyes lit up. Of course she is not stupid. She will not force her way through this formation, but I can use this formation to smash her. He clenched his fist, and 9 drops of Heaven Mirror Flowers blood appeared in his palm. How could I waste the 10 drops of Heaven Mirror Flowers blood that the Emperor Qing schemed for an entire era to obtain for me? Su Yu stood in place, then pressed his palm against his forehead. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The 9 drops of blood immediately entered Su Yu's body, and his chest suddenly lit up. An oil lamp, which was emitting a faint light, could be faintly seen on his chest. That was the divine body oil lamp. The 9 drops of blood revolved around the oil lamp. They tried to leave the oil lamp, but they were bound by the great power of the oil lamp and could only revolve around it. Drop by drop, they were absorbed into the oil lamp. Sizzle, when a shred of blood was absorbed into the oil lamp, the weak flame of the lamp, which was about to be extinguished, suddenly grew by an inch, illuminating Su Yu's chest even more clearly. His shadow, under the blossoming light, was magnified by a fold. As more and more blood essence was absorbed, the light grew brighter and brighter, and the shadow behind him grew larger and larger. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops. After 3 drops, his figure had already grown 10 times larger, and it was still growing exponentially. A huge shadow enveloped the world. After 6 drops, his figure had been enlarged 1,000 times. After 9 drops, the light of the lamp was so dazzling that it was difficult to look at it directly. Strangely, Su Yu's shadow was becoming clearer and clearer. The shadow was so huge that it covered half of the Heavenly Law realm. Its head was the size of the entire Heavenly Law Alliance. The huge shadow engulfed all the living creatures in the world. What was even more frightening was that the shadow contained a will of awakening. It was as if a being that had been sleeping for ages was slowly awakening. In the Heavenly Law realm, the blood of the living creatures who felt the awakening will was boiling. The scattered humans felt an excitement that came from the depths of their souls. It was as if the human king, who had been silent for a long time, was about to awaken. The little skeleton was not surprised. He stared at the dazzling Su Yu and murmured, "How long has it been since I last saw such a scene?" The last person to have a mature divine body was the human ancestor. Because of the era and their own circumstances, the 7 emperors had never broken through the shackles and become mature divine bodies. Now, the chosen successor of the human ancestor had finally reached this step. The 9 drops of Emperor's blood were all absorbed by the oil lamp. The latter slowly flew out from the top of Su Yu's head and hovered in the air. The oil lamp was no longer what it used to be. Its whole body was overflowing with spiritual light. The oil lamp was engraved with complicated patterns, and the light it emitted had an inexplicable energy that could expel all the darkness in the world and warm the earth. Under its illumination, the terrifying giant shadow that was suppressing the Heavenly Law realm did not dissipate. Instead, it became clearer. It had well-defined facial features, long black hair, a clean and majestic body, and a pair of eyes that were slowly opening. The left eye was a rotating star, and the right eye was an alternating sun and moon. It was as if those eyes were filled with the starry sky of the universe and could look down on the heavens. Huff! A long exhalation came from the mouth of the shadow. Part of the gas flew up to the 9 heavens and turned into stars and clouds. Another part fell to the earth and turned into mountains and spirit veins. The last part stayed on the earth and turned into billions of living creatures. This scene was very much like the scene of the primordial gas turning into all living things in the world. I have woken up. The giant shadow spoke and sat up slowly from the ground. For a moment, the earth of the heavenly law realm shook, and cracks appeared, as if it could not bear its existence. When he stood up, the heavens above his head shook violently, and the boundless nebula receded, revealing a looming mountain above the nebula. The shadow stood behind Su Yu and gradually overlapped with Su Yu's shadow. Upon closer inspection, the silhouette of the giant shadow was exactly the same as Su Yu's. Su Yu raised his hand and grabbed it. The oil lamp that was once intangible was now solid, and Su Yu held it in his palm. Is this the mature human sacred body? Su Yu murmured as he held the oil lamp. In the distance, the first ancestor finally caught up and stood outside the heavenly law realm. Her beautiful eyes narrowed as she stared unblinkingly at the indomitable shadow. He also has the human sacred body? There was finally a trace of surprise on the first ancestor's indifferent face. After a moment of silence, she stepped forward and chose to continue the chase. The ancestral techniques of the Soul Saint clan are not to be passed on to outsiders, even if you are the descendant of the human ancestor. The first ancestor was determined to kill. Even if Su Yu's human sacred body had matured, he was still no match for her. She had surpassed the ordinary realm and even surpassed the scope of living creatures. She was an existence that even the Emperor had to be wary of. Su Yu was no match for her. At that moment, Su Yu looked over and said calmly, "You will pay the price for hunting me down." Chapter 3088. He grabbed the boundless barrier with his right hand, and a loud, earth-shattering sound reverberated throughout the starry sky. Within the borders of the Heavenly Law Alliance, countless members of the Heavenly Law Alliance who were fleeing looked up at the sky in horror. The barrier that had existed for more than a dozen epochs was actually separated from the earth, and was lifted up by that unparalleled giant. It was as if the huge bowl-shaped net was nothing more than a fishing net in his hand. More importantly, the giant's palm contained a strong power of the holy body, so it did not directly touch the giant barrier net. Therefore, it did not hurt him at all. Right at that moment, the first ancestor finally arrived. She stopped before the giant net was lifted, and her pretty eyes narrowed slightly. A mature holy body is so powerful, the first ancestor exclaimed slightly. She had heard that there was a unique acquired body among the human race, which was called the human holy body. It did not originate from the bloodline, nor could it be cultivated in the later stages. It was born by gathering the faith of the human race. However, when the faith accumulated to a certain stage, it would produce the constitution of a holy body. However, since this era, many holy bodies had been born, but only a few people had awakened them, let alone cultivated them. Moreover, a mature holy body had not appeared since the human ancestor. Now, the little human she was chasing had cultivated to the level of a mature holy body. It was incredible! While she was pondering, Su Yu had already made his move. The boundless barrier in his hand was raised high, and he smashed it towards the first ancestor. The first ancestor's expression was slightly grave. She could see how terrifying the power accumulated in the barrier was. Even someone as strong as her could not face it head-on. Swish! Her figure flashed, and she was ready to dodge out of the attack range of the barrier at an extremely fast speed. At her level, it was almost impossible for difficult throws and hammer strikes to hurt her. This was because her movement technique was already so fast that it could surpass time. However, she did not expect that Su Yu was the one who could control time. Time set. The unparalleled figure opened his mouth and shouted fiercely. The time realm was shouted out from the mouth of the human holy body, and it had an irresistible mysterious power. The Xing River, the earth, the grass, the trees, the mountains, everything was frozen in time. Wherever the voice passed, time would forcefully freeze. under the effect of that strand of absolute beginning force. Even the web-like barrier that had been passed down through the ages seemed to freeze. Caught off guard, the first ancestor's body was frozen in place. Although it was only for an instant, not even enough to blink, it was enough for an expert. Bang! The enormous energy barrier that had lasted for more than 10 great eras finally smashed fiercely into the ground, descending with Group 1 at the center. Chila, because of the fierce impact, a hole was torn open in the barrier. The incomparably terrifying energy inside was pouring out towards the first ancestor. However, just as the boundless destructive power was about to reach him, the first ancestor suddenly broke free from the frozen time and retreated madly. She reacted in time and avoided a large part of the energy impact, but she still couldn't avoid being attacked by the remaining energy around her. Lightning and sparks immediately erupted from her body, setting her body ablaze. She herself was blasted back 1,000,000 miles, crashing into all the mountains in her way. Finally, she crashed into the heavenly Tao realm boundary steel before finally stopping. The corners of her mouth were covered in blood, and her body emitted a charred smell. The high-grade Tao artifact she wore was either torn or burned. Even her exposed skin was burned. Her fine black hair was disheveled, and her fair face was covered in black smoke. The girl next door, who had been as calm as ever, was no longer there, and all that was left was an extremely sorry state. However, she was only a sorry state. She wasn't even seriously injured. Little Skeleton gritted his teeth and sighed. Sigh. Just a little bit more. If this woman had broken free even half a breath later, she would have been seriously injured or even killed. But now, she was only slightly injured. What a pity. Now that the barrier's energy had been released, it would be extremely difficult to find another powerful force to destroy this old woman. Most importantly, they had successfully enraged this woman. They originally had one more day, but now, that might not be the case anymore. As expected, the first ancestor slowly raised her head, and a trace of murderous intent appeared in her smokeless and indifferent eyes. She slowly flew out of the sunken boundary steel, and from 1,000,000 miles away she coldly said, "This attack will cancel out 1 day of your time. Now, the time you have left is 0. As soon as she said that, the first ancestor's body surged like a flood, and it was as if 10,000 beasts were roaring. It was as if a prehistoric torrent that could destroy the world was released from her body. Boom! Visible to the naked eye, a transparent liquid rushed out of her body, and with her as the center, everything on the ground was destroyed as easily as crushing dry weeds. Mountains collapsed, rivers were sent flying, and even the plains were swept up into a 100-meter-deep crater. All living beings nearby didn't even have a chance to escape before they were turned into dust. Boundless waves of air surged for millions of miles, destroying everything in their path. As far as the eye could see, there was only desolation left on the vast land. And this was just the power she released from her body. She didn't use any techniques at all. This was a true 10,000 saint expert. Every move she made had the power to destroy the world. Are you ready? The first ancestor walked over slowly. It seemed like a step, but in fact, it crossed countless spaces and came directly to Suyu. Unexpectedly, there was no fear on Suyu's face. Instead, it was full of calmness. Then, are you ready? The first ancestor frowned slightly. What did Suyu mean? Right at that moment, Suyu suddenly opened his mouth and shouted fiercely, "Prison drawing!" The unparalleled giant shadow behind him suddenly fell with a rumble, shrouding the land for millions of miles. The first ancestor hesitated for a moment, but she didn't retreat. It was just the shadow of the human clan's saint body, so there was nothing to fear. She raised her palm, and there was a majestic aura that could support the heavens and the earth. Rumble. The giant shadow suddenly collapsed and crashed down, but she easily blocked the chest of the shadow. The collapsing shadow didn't cause any harm to her. However, what slightly puzzled the first ancestor was that after the shadow touched the ground, it immediately dissipated into black words of the heavenly book. In addition, there were densely packed ancestral technique. This is... The first ancestor was surprised and puzzled. Suddenly, her eyes narrowed and focused on the collapsed fragments of the black shadow. There was an inconspicuous stone tablet the size of a palm. The stone tablet was extremely ancient, beyond the first ancestor's understanding. However, it was full of ancestral marks, which made her shudder with fear. It was as if she had seen the source of all things. Her terrible power, when it encountered the stone tablet, collapsed one after another. There are 2 more chapters in the evening. Also, Happy New Year! Please remember the original domain name of this book. Mobile version website. Chapter 3089. How could this be? The first ancestor's beautiful eyes were filled with shock. What kind of power could suppress her cultivation, which she had cultivated for 7 or 8 eras? What on earth was that thing? However, while she was in shock, Suyu did not hesitate. The giant barrier that he had controlled the giant shadow to raise collapsed completely after losing the giant's grip. Although a large amount of energy had been lost before, there was still 1/10 of the energy left in the giant net-like barrier. Now that it had lost its support, all of the energy fell like a waterfall, pressing down on the first ancestor. The first ancestor's expression changed slightly, but all of her strength was suppressed by the energy emitted by the stone tablet, causing her to lose the ability to transcend time. She could only resist it with her strong body. At the critical moment, she opened her mouth, and a silver umbrella made of unknown materials flew out and quickly appeared above her head. Walala! The pouring rain fell on the silver umbrella, but it was all bounced off, not hurting the first ancestor directly. However, she did not feel good. The silver umbrella had indeed bounced off the energy rain, but the impact caused by the pouring energy was still transmitted through the silver umbrella to the first ancestor's palm. The umbrella in her hand kept sliding down, and a layer of the skin on the first ancestor's palm was rubbed off, causing blood to flow out. This did not stop. Suyu held the oil lamp with both hands, opened his mouth and shouted, "Heaven-covering holy body!" However, the shattered fragments of the gigantic shadow actually fused back together and wrapped around the first ancestor along with the boundless energy that was pouring out. The energy that fell on the silver umbrella flowed through the giant shadow's body, then fell on the silver umbrella again. The cycle repeated, causing the first ancestor to fall into the huge impact again and again, unable to extricate herself. Seeing this, the little skeleton was dumbfounded. "Oh my God, I've really been trapped by you." It had originally thought that Suyu wanted to use the giant energy net to give the first ancestor a fierce blow. It did not expect that Suyu's real purpose was actually to trap her. Moreover, it was as if he could foresee the future. He calculated again, and finally succeeded in trapping her in the giant shadow. Suyu did not dare to stay any longer. He grabbed the returning ruins divine tablet, rode on the little skeleton, and immediately left. "Hurry up! We can't delay her for long." That power could suppress the first ancestor, but the holy body giant shadow he had conjured with the oil lamp was just a giant shadow. As time passed, the holy body giant shadow's power would gradually dissipate until it could no longer maintain the giant shadow. At that time, first ancestor wouldn't be restricted and would definitely break free. 3 days at most. Suyu looked in the direction of the Tsangtian mountain. The little skeleton was reinvigorated. He gritted his teeth and said, 3 days are enough. It tried its best to carry Suyu through the endless starry sky, as if it was chasing after the stars and the moon. They passed by several caverns along the way, and finally arrived at the 10,000 Supremes cave after a day. On the second day, he arrived at the cloud-desolate territories Tsangtian Mountain. Amidst the howling wind, Suyu finally returned to the stronghold that he had been away from for a long time. The cauldron's influence was developing in an orderly manner. "You're back?" The sinful lady was the first to sense Su Yu's return, and she immediately went forward to welcome him along with Su Kai. Looking at Su Yu's exhausted look, the sinful woman's heart was filled with bitterness. This time, he must have experienced some unknown dangers outside. "Uncle, are you hurt?" Su Kai went forward to ask with concern. Su Yu jumped off the little skeleton and stroked her head with relief. He shook his head slightly and said, "No, I'm fine." "Is it good?" The sinful woman felt an inexplicable pain in her heart. She felt that Su Yu's life was too tiring. He was constantly on the move without rest. "We're fine too. With the help of Aunt Sinful Lady, our cauldron has completely gained a foothold in the Tsangtian Mountain. Most of the influences are willing to join our cauldron and become our vassal influences." "Eh?" Su Yu was slightly surprised. "Vassal?" Before he left, he had only asked the Greenwood Saint clan to sign an alliance agreement with the sacred Netherworld clan. "What's going on?" Su Yu asked. The sinful woman smiled slightly and stroked her hair. She said, "Actually, it's nothing. They figured it out on their own. Who would be willing to become someone else's vassal?" Without a doubt, the sinful woman had used some unspeakable means to intimidate many influences. That was why they were finally willing to join the cauldron and become its vassal. "You made the decision on your own." Su Yu looked at the sinful woman. The sinful woman had been waiting for Su Yu to praise her, but when he said this, her face stiffened. She lowered her head and said with a sad look in her eyes, "I'm sorry. I made the decision on my own without your permission." Unexpectedly, Su Yu walked over and patted her shoulder. "But you didn't do anything wrong." After experiencing the incident in the Heavenly Law prison, Su Yu already had a plan for his future. If he wanted to obtain the human ancestor's legacy and become the second human ancestor in the world, it was inevitable that he would have to climb the Heavenly Road. And the qualification to climb the Heavenly Road was to become the current human king. The human clan's orders were scattered all over the 9-star civilizations. If he wanted to become their human king, he would have to compete with the talents of the various regions. At that time, without his own influence, he would definitely not be able to fight alone. The cauldron had to have the foundation to dominate the 9-star civilizations. So, devouring the Tsangtian Mountain was the first step. Even if the sinful woman had not taken action, he would have taken action. Hearing this, the disappointed sinful woman regained her vigor, and a faint blush appeared on her pretty face. "In the future, you'd better discuss it with me, do you understand?" Su Yu said softly. The sinful woman nodded her head weakly. "Oh, I understand. I won't do it again." Su Yu shook his head. "What I mean is, you made the decision on your own. If you encounter danger, I will be worried." This was the reason why he reminded her, not because he was worried that the sinful woman would mess things up. "Worried about me?" the sinful woman stammered, as if she could not believe that Su Yu would be worried about her. For a moment, she felt like she was in a huge whirlpool of happiness, unable to extricate herself. "By the way, which forces did not join the cauldron?" Su Yu asked. Since he had decided to use the Tsangtian Mountain as his starting point, he had to firmly control this place. The sinful woman came back to her senses, took out a small booklet, and handed it to Su Yu. It recorded the hundreds of forces in the Tsangtian Mountain, as well as those who had chosen to join the cauldron and those who had refused to join. Su Yu quickly flipped through the booklet. Only 3 forces had refused to join. 2 of them were small and medium-sized forces, not worth mentioning. However, one of them made Su Yu's brows raise slightly. That Saint clan member was none other than the puppet Saint clan member. It was an extraordinarily stubborn Saint clan member from the outside world. After obtaining Su Yu's ancestral technique, it had happily agreed to form an offensive and defensive alliance with the cauldron. However, it had refused to become the cauldron's vassal. Chapter 3090. The puppet saint race is truly despicable. After learning our techniques, they immediately turned hostile. Su Kai said angrily. Suyu pondered for a moment, then said, I can't say that the Puppet Saint clan has fallen out with us. After all, the Cauldron's request to join them is really forcing us against our will. However, even the sinful girl spoke out with a slightly cold expression. No. They've really fallen out. Suyu was surprised. How? The sinful lady said slowly, Ever since you left, the sacred puppet tribe announced that they would be in seclusion. So be it. The sacred puppet tribe doesn't meet outsiders all year round. Outsiders are used to it. But no one expected that ever since the sacred puppet clan went into seclusion, people from Songtian Mountain disappeared one after another. Even people from our cauldron disappeared. Suyu finally became serious, and he asked in a serious voice, Who disappeared? Emoheng. The sinful girl slowly spat out 2 words, and her tone was filled with deep regret. Him? Suyu was quite surprised. When did this happen? Why didn't you inform me? The sinful lady lowered her head in shame. You are carrying out an important mission outside. If we inform you, we will only make you worry for nothing, so that's why you have to act on your own. Suyu had already guessed what would happen next. Sure enough, Su Kaier added, through the things that Emoheng left behind, we tracked his whereabouts. He's in the sacred puppet tribe, but when we went to ask for him, the puppet ancestor turned hostile and sent his puppets to attack us, causing us heavy losses. She clenched her fists indignantly, anger written all over her little face. The sinful lady sighed softly and said, Actually, it wasn't our cauldron that suffered the greatest loss, but the sacred Netherworld clan. It turned out that all the forces had people missing, and many people had already suspected the sacred puppet clan, but there was no evidence. Coincidentally, the cauldron found out that Emoheng had disappeared with the sacred puppet clan, and under the cauldron's summon, they all came to the sacred puppet clan to demand an explanation. The puppet patriarch was still as rude and unreasonable as ever. After refusing to allow them to enter and inspect the puppet patriarch several times, he decisively commanded the puppet patriarch to attack them. The members of the sacred Nether clan were the first to bear the brunt of the attack, and they suffered the heaviest injuries. Their bodies were destroyed on the spot, and even their souls were heavily injured. They might perish soon. Su Yu's eyes flashed with a cold light. He really didn't expect such a drastic change to take place on the Songtian Mountain after he left. It seems like the puppet ancestor has chosen to strike first to gain the upper hand, Suyu said coldly. When he and Emoheng had visited the sacred puppet race, they had seen a super puppet that the sacred puppet race had been building for several generations, a dangerous object forged from the remains of a 10,000 saints expert and made from blue heart iron. At that time, Suyu had sensed that the puppet was extremely dangerous. Once it was successfully crafted, it would be earth-shattering and might even attract the attention of the Holy Mountain's heavenly sons. On the other hand, Emoheng bluntly said that the puppet was most likely a living creature. As the #1 genius weapon refiner of a 9-star civilization, Emoheng's intuition was very accurate. Therefore, Suyu had once said that when the matter of the Heavenly Law prison was over, he would infiltrate the Puppet Saint clan personally and take the dangerous puppet away to prevent any future troubles. He hadn't expected that before he could take action, the sacred puppet tribe would sense it and capture Emoheng first. If he guessed correctly, the puppet ancestor must have captured Emoheng to do one thing: to refine a missing heart for that puppet. The puppet had been forged by the Abyss Puppet Clan for countless generations and had been perfectly refined. Now it only lacked a qualified heart. And Emoheng was one of the few people in the world who could refine this heart. Therefore, his capture must have something to do with the heart. The rest of the missing people were most likely related to the heart. What a sacred puppet tribe! Su Yu's eyes flickered with a cold light. Keep the stronghold well and don't go out unless it's necessary. I'm going out for a while. Having just jumped down, he returned to the back of the little skeleton and rode it to the sacred Netherworld clan. At that moment, in the secret chamber of the sacred Netherworld clan, several strong ancient saints were surrounding an ancient bluestone slab. On it lay a vague soul. That was the Netherworld ancestor, who was so seriously injured that only a remnant of his soul was left. Beside him, the Greenwood ancestor was healing his injuries with his pure Greenwood clan realm, hoping to restore his soul. Greenwood ancestor, how is the situation? An ancient saint of the sacred Netherworld clan asked hopefully. The Greenwood ancestor shook his head and sighed. If the illness was in the body, my realm might have a miraculous effect. But the injury is in the soul, the most mysterious part of the human body. I can't do anything about it. Hearing that, several ancient saints couldn't help but turn pale. Some of them even became mournful. Greenwood ancestor, I beg you, you must save our ancestor. The Greenwood ancestor sighed and helped them up. Now we are already members of the Cauldron, so we are bound together for good or bad. How can I leave it alone? But I have tried my best. The ancient saints were even sadder and at a loss. Greenwood, who came with them, sighed softly. If only the Cauldron Zune was here. With his ability, he might be able to cure the Netherworld ancestor. The Greenwood ancestor shook his head slightly. Even if the Cauldron Zune was here, I'm afraid he couldn't do anything about it. When it comes to the soul, no one can save it. Hearing that, everyone's expression became gloomy. But suddenly, the Greenwood ancestor raised his eyebrows and looked above his head. The others sensed it one after another and looked over. They saw a space crack appear above their heads, and a person fell from it. The Cauldron Zune? Although the other party was in a black robe, who else could have the superb space realm other than the Cauldron Zune? Suyu landed in the secret chamber and nodded to them casually. Then, he looked at the green stone platform, where the soul of the Netherworld ancestor was extremely weak. The latter sensed Suyu's arrival and said weakly, "The Cauldron Zune, the first time I called you that was when I was about to die." He reached out his hand and tried to grab Suyu's sleeve. Suyu patted the back of his hand and said, "You will be fine." With Suyu, who had the ancestral technique of soul, he would really be fine. However, this sentence was taken as a consolation to a dying person. The ancestral lord of the underworld shook his head slightly. His confused face revealed a trace of pleading light in his eyes. Although the sacred underworld tribe has never contributed anything to the Cauldron, please take into account that I have signed an alliance with the Cauldron Venerable. Please take care of my sacred underworld tribe and don't let them decline so quickly, okay? A sacred netherworld tribe had no new great saints, and the great saints of the older generation had fallen. The possibility of the sacred netherworld tribe falling was almost 100%. Without a strong person in charge, all the resources controlled by the sacred netherworld tribe would be snatched away in a short time. In that case, it would be more difficult for new great saints to be born, and the sacred netherworld tribe would gradually decline. His request was not to ensure that the sacred netherworld tribe would not decline, but to delay its decline. This was the only wish of the netherworld ancestor before his death. I'm very sorry for passing on the wrong chapter. It's my fault for not being careful enough. Reviewing. Chapter 3091. No. Suyu straightforwardly refused the dying request of the netherworld old ancestor. The netherworld old ancestor's face was filled with deep disappointment. He had thought that Suyu would show him mercy and grant his dying wish before he died. He didn't expect Suyu to refuse him so directly. The Greenwood old ancestor looked at Suyu and couldn't help but feel disappointed. They had joined the Cauldron and become its vassal force. However, in the end, Suyu didn't even agree to protect them. Even if he agreed, Suyu didn't need to do anything special. He just needed to keep an eye on the members of the Cauldron and take care of them. Even so, Suyu still refused. He couldn't help but wonder if Suyu would also refuse him if he begged him one day. Was such a cauldron worth the unwavering loyalty of the Greenwood Saint clan? The answer was no. The ancient saints of the sacred Netherworld clan also felt disappointed. However, because of Su Yu's presence, they all kept silent and didn't show it. The Netherworld Old Ancestor sighed slightly and said self-mockingly, "I've gone too far. Cauldron Master, just pretend I didn't say anything." Su Yu nodded. "Well, your request is really too much. I can't do it." Hearing this, the rest of the people were even more disappointed and angry. If Su Yu didn't agree, he wouldn't agree. Could he show some respect when talking to a dying man? Why did he have to be so hurtful? However, Su Yu's next words stunned everyone present. "You can't even die, but you want me to take care of your clan." "I really can't do it," Su Yu said lightly. Hearing this, everyone present was stunned. What did he mean? The Netherworld Old Ancestor's already weak eyes suddenly opened wide. He said, "Cauldron Master, I know my own injuries." His soul was injured to such an extent, and he was only a moment away from death. Even the best elixirs in the world couldn't heal his injuries. The Greenwood Old Ancestor thought Su Yu didn't understand the situation, so he said hurriedly, "Cauldron Master, the Netherworld Old Ancestor's soul has been greatly injured and can't be healed by any means." Su Yu was expressionless. He said lightly, "How big of a world do you think you can't be healed by anyone in this world?" This. Forefather Greenwood was taken aback. The world he had seen was not small, right? He had been to most of the places in the Myriad Venerable's cave, and even the Mirror Flower Heavenly Emperor realm. But this had nothing to do with healing soul injuries, right? Soul injuries were known to be troublesome, especially for Old Ancestor Netherworld, who had half of his soul destroyed. It was impossible to treat him. Without saying a word, Su Yu drew a line in the air with 2 fingers, and a faintly discernible ancestral technique hovered above the Netherworld Old Ancestor's body. This is a soul ancestral technique? Ancestor Greenwood said with uncertainty. He could sense the tyrannical soul strength that filled the ancestral art. This was something that could only be emitted by a soul ancestral art. However, how could Su Yu, a human, learn the ancestral technique of the Soul Saint clan? The Soul Sacred clan existed in this world, and it was the strongest sacred clan in the Mirror Flower Heaven's realm. There were many peerless old monsters among them, and any one of them could intimidate an entire region. Where did Su Yu learn this from? What they didn't know was that not even the ancestors of the sacred soul race had successfully learned the complete ancestral soul method. Su Yu pointed his finger, and the ancestral technique revolved. Wisps of soul fluorescence fell from the void. That is the soul fragment of the Netherworld Old Ancestor? This. Ancestor Greenwood's pupils shrank as he said in horror. Ever since the Netherworld Old Ancestor Netherworld was rescued, his soul had been disintegrating. Wisps of soul fragments disappeared into the void and disappeared. However, Su Yu simply performed the ancestral soul technique and found all the lost soul fragments. Before long, the blurred half of the Netherworld Old Ancestor Netherworld's soul body became clear again. However, the other half of his soul had been destroyed when it was attacked by the Puppet Saint clan. That was not something that could be recovered by the ancestral technique. Su Yu withdrew the ancestral technique and placed his palm on the other half of the soul. Then, he performed the secret soul technique that he had comprehended from the ancestral technique, the duplication. Return the right body with the left way. A large soul domain spread out from his palm, and a scene that caused everyone present to suck in a breath of cold air appeared. The other half of the Netherworld Old Ancestor Netherworld's soul was duplicated out of thin air. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, they wouldn't have believed it. There was such a technique in this world that could heal soul injuries. After 10 minutes, the Netherworld Old Ancestor's soul was restored to its peak state. He bounced up and looked at his complete soul as if he was dreaming. He had a surreal feeling. My soul has really recovered? Su Yu withdrew his palm and took a light breath. This technique, consumed a lot of the soul realm and energy. He could only save one person a day. He couldn't save more people. I will never forget Cauldron Master's life-saving grace. The Netherworld Old Ancestor's respect for Su Yu increased greatly. He was on the verge of death, but Su Yu had saved him. It was a kindness that could never be repaid. Su Yu said calmly, "Serve the cauldron wholeheartedly. That is the greatest repayment." The Netherworld Old Ancestor clenched his teeth and said decisively, "I apply to join the cauldron completely. From now on, there will be no sacred Netherworld tribe." Now, the sacred Netherworld tribe was just a vassal force of the cauldron. They could leave the cauldron at any time without any restrictions. However, once they joined, they would be a member of the cauldron and must be controlled by the cauldron. At the level of the sacred Netherworld tribe, it was usually impossible to abandon their own tribe and join another force. However, Su Yu's kindness was too great. This was the only way for the Netherworld Old Ancestor to repay him. Su Yu looked at the ancient saints of the sacred Netherworld tribe. "Then you have to ask for their opinion." The sacred Netherworld tribe was the family of all the people of the Netherworld, not the Netherworld Old Ancestor alone. If they were unwilling, they might not be able to become a member of the cauldron. "We are willing," the ancient saints said immediately. Without Su Yu's help, the sacred Netherworld tribe would have lost their old ancestor and disappeared sooner or later. If they joined the cauldron now, they could still maintain the continuation and development of the sacred Netherworld tribe. Why not? Moreover, after seeing Su Yu's nature-defying means, who wouldn't fall for him? Following Su Yu was like having a source of immortality. As long as they performed well enough, Su Yu could use the ancestral soul technique to resurrect them. Why wouldn't they follow such a king? All the people of the Netherworld tribe present knelt on one knee and expressed their intention to join. The Greenwood Old Ancestor's mouth was dry. After struggling for a while in his mind, he bowed and said, "Cauldron Master, please give me some time to go back and consult with my people." He was also tempted. 10 o'clock at night, 2 o'clock. Please remember this book's domain name. Mobile version. Chapter 3092. "It's up to you," Su Yu said casually. Su Yu asked casually while his gaze became sharp. "Tell me in detail what happened after I left." The sinful lady and the others had only been established for a short time, so their sources of information were far less extensive than the Greenwood Saint clan and the Sacred Netherworld clan. They should be able to grasp more information. The Netherworld Old Ancestor answered immediately, "Cauldron Master, this is what happened." He told them all the information the Sacred Netherworld clan had. The result was similar to what the sinful lady had said, except for one important piece of information that the sinful lady did not know. There was once a mysterious young man who came to visit the Sacred Puppet clan. The day after he left, strange things happened one after another on the Tsongtian mountain until the crafting master, Mo-Heng, was captured. The Sacred Puppet clan's many conspiracies were completely exposed, which led to a war between the two sides. The Greenwood Saint Ancestor said angrily, "The Sacred Puppet clan ambushed us and caught the people who went to ask for it by surprise. We suffered heavy casualties and couldn't continue to fight the Sacred Puppet clan." Even the two sacred clans had suffered such heavy losses, let alone the other great families. Their casualties would probably be even more tragic. The Netherworld Old Ancestor clenched his fists. "Cauldron Master, if we want to take revenge, we need to think about it carefully. Otherwise, if we go there now, we will only be courting death." They had too few strong men, and the giant puppet of the Sacred Puppet clan was too powerful. Su Yu said calmly, "Think about it carefully? How long? 8 to 10 years or 100 years?" He didn't have that much time to wait. Not to mention that the first ancestor would catch up soon. He couldn't delay Mo-Heng's capture. With Mo-Heng's crafting skills, if he was threatened by the Sacred Puppet clan, he would definitely be able to craft the heart of the puppet forged from the skeleton of the 10,000 saints. At that time, once the puppet was born, it would be invincible in the world. Su Yu and Mo Hing both had the same hunch that the puppet was an ominous thing, and it must not be allowed to be born successfully. But, the Netherworld Old Ancestor said hesitantly, they were indeed in a disadvantageous position, and acting rashly was not a wise move. Su Yu pressed down his palm and interrupted him. You don't have to come to the sacred puppet clan in person. You just need to mobilize our people and wait for an opportunity. Everyone understood what he meant. The Netherworld Ancestor asked, What about you, Cauldron Venerable? Su Yu's eyes flickered slightly. I will personally go to the Puppet Saint clan. Ancestor Greenwood and Ancestor Yuming were shocked. Cauldron Master, no. That giant puppet from the Puppet Saint clan is extraordinarily powerful. It must not be underestimated. Back then, when the Puppet Saint clan came to Songtian Mountain, they rode the incomparably tall puppet and fought with the two patriarchs. In the end, the two patriarchs were defeated. Now that old ancestor Yuming was attacked by the puppet again and almost died, it was not hard to imagine how powerful the puppet was. You don't have to worry about that, Su Yu said lightly. If I want to enter the Puppet Saint clan, it will be a piece of cake. Follow my instructions, gather everyone, and act according to the situation. Immediately, Su Yu broke through the air and reappeared in the sky above the sacred Netherworld tribe, landing on the back of the little skeleton. Su Yu pointed his finger, and the little skeleton flew away like the wind, bringing Su Yu to the vicinity of the Puppet Saint clan. From a distance, the Puppet Saint clan was littered with corpses that had not been taken away in time. The ground was a mess, with rotting corpses and demonic beasts that had come to look for food. There was no one around, and it gave people an unusually savage feeling. It was hard to imagine that not long ago, this place was crowded with the Puppet Saint clan. In the territory of the Puppet Saint clan, a puppet's head was exposed, and its body was buried deep underground. At this time, there were many fully armed puppets patrolling the periphery of the Puppet Saint clan. It was almost impossible to break into the Puppet Saint clan without alerting anyone. In fact, it was difficult to even get close to it without alerting them. More importantly, the Puppet Saint clan was proficient in the forging of mechanisms, and this giant puppet was the residence of the Puppet Saint clan for countless years. It was more than just a few clansmen that were guarding it. The entrance was densely packed with traps, and it would be difficult to break in. Master, it is not easy to get in. That puppet is not simple. The little skeleton had followed Emperor Qing on expeditions from north to south and had seen a lot. He could tell at a glance that the puppet was extraordinary. Su Yu's eyes were calm as he raised his palm. It is not difficult. In the palm of his hand, an hourglass slowly appeared. The domain of time was silently released from the palm of his hand, and it filled the surroundings. The patrolling puppets were frozen in time without warning. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Su Yu came to the entrance of the Puppet Saint clan. However, he did not enter rashly. If he had guessed correctly, there were extremely dangerous traps waiting for him inside. He aimed at one of the clansmen, clapped his palm, and landed it on his shoulder. He used the soul substitution that Ling Hu Yang had practiced before, and swapped his soul with that of this person. The little skeleton saw this, and could not help but be surprised. This soul secret technique is fun. Su Yu, the Su Yu who had entered the body of that clansman, turned around and looked at his own body, as well as the clansman's soul that had entered his body. Keep an eye on him. The little skeleton chuckled and slapped Su Yu's body to the ground. Then, he covered Su Yu's head and pinned it to the ground. The poor human had not figured out what was going on, and he was knocked unconscious by the slap. The veins on Su Yu's forehead bulged. The little skeleton laughed dryly. I am sorry, my hand slipped and I hit him too hard. What did he mean by hitting him too hard? It was obvious that he was taking the opportunity to take revenge on Su Yu for his abuse in the Heavenly Law prison. I will settle the score with you later. Su Yu glared at him. When the little skeleton carried Su Yu's body away, he raised his hand and waved. The time freeze in the sky dissipated. The patrolling clansmen did not notice anything unusual at all and continued to patrol. Su Yu walked to the entrance and said, "I will go in and report." "Lord Fu Jun, didn't you just report?" a patroller asked in surprise. Su Yu glanced at him. "Can't you report it again?" The patroller shrank his neck. Although he was puzzled, he did not ask again. Su Yu came to the entrance. He had mastered part of the patrolling leader's memory. He took out the golden token from his chest skillfully and touched it to the mouth of the puppet at the entrance. Creak! The giant door opened to reveal a crack that only one person could pass through. After Su Yu entered, he found that the mouth was densely filled with round beads. The power of those round beads could be considered powerful, second only to the golden round beads that he had snatched from the little skeleton. If one of them exploded, it was enough to destroy a strong great saint. If all of them exploded, no one below the level of a 10,000 saint could survive. Su Yu thought to himself, sure enough, there must be traps hidden in the puppet. If he barged in by force, he would not even know how he died. At 12 o'clock, the next chapter was updated. Please remember the domain name of this book. Mobile version. Chapter 3093. As soon as Su Yu entered, a red beam of light shot out from the mechanism on both sides, scanning Su Yu from head to toe. Su Yu suddenly felt that his body was being inspected from the inside out, and any abnormalities could be discovered by the red beam. "Come in." After a while, the beam of light disappeared and was replaced by a hoarse voice. It seemed that he had successfully passed the inspection and his identity had been confirmed. Su Yu quietly passed through the entrance and entered the interior of the Puppet Saint clan for the second time. As soon as he entered, a huge gear turned in front of him, revealing a hidden space behind the gear. An ancient sage-level Puppet Saint clan elder walked out from it. With his hands behind his back, he frowned and said, "What's the matter?" Su Yu cupped his fists and said calmly, "My lord, how should we deal with the corpses outside?" He did not act rashly. This place was full of mechanisms, and all of them were controlled by people. If he made a careless move, the other party could trigger the mechanism. As for whether it would pose a threat to him, Su Yu was not too worried. He was worried about alerting the enemy. "You should disturb me for such a trivial matter?" The ancient saint elder scolded and looked Su Yu up and down. "What's wrong with you?" Su Yu still maintained a respectful posture and said, "I think it's better to deal with those corpses properly, so as not to provoke more strong men of the Tsangtian mountain." The ancient saint elder said disapprovingly, "What other strong men are there in the Tsangtian mountain? Can't you count on the Cauldron master? Not to mention that he has not returned yet. Even if he does, so what? He can't even enter the Puppet Saint clan." The ancient saint elder was quite confident in the defense of the Puppet Saint clan. Su Yu slowly straightened up and said, "My lord, I can't agree with you." "Hey!" The ancient saint elder was really surprised. A small clan member dared to oppose him on the spot. Where did he get the courage to do so? No. As sharp as the ancient saint elder was, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. However, he couldn't pinpoint what was wrong. It was not until Su Yu's words woke him up. "It's actually very easy for the Cauldron Master to come in." The ancient saint elder immediately stepped back and scolded, "Who are you?" Unfortunately, it was too late. Su Yu took a step forward, patted his shoulder, and immediately performed the soul substitution technique. Su Yu's soul quickly occupied the body of the ancient saint elder, while the latter's soul entered the body of the patrol leader. His eyes were filled with disbelief as he looked at himself standing in front of him and shouted, "Guards! Guards!" However, there was no movement in the surroundings. The clansmen who were patrolling outside acted as if they were deaf and did not care at all until Su Yu took out a six-sided die from his bosom. This was the core that controlled the nearby mechanisms. With a bit of activation, He isolated this place from the outside world. Even if he screamed himself hoarse, no one would care. "Who are you?" the elder of the ancient saint exclaimed in horror. Su Yu shot him a chilling smile. "I am the one you thought couldn't get in." "What?" The ancient saint elder was taken aback. You're a Cauldron venerable?" "Bingo." Su Yu walked forward with a smile, and as the man looked at him with an unwilling gaze, Su Yu slapped his head and knocked him out on the spot. After putting him into the space storage device, Su Yu came to a large number of gears based on his previous memory. He activated the sieve, and the gears spun rapidly, revealing a passage that led straight to the giant puppet. He jumped down. Before he reached the bottom, he could feel the intense flames spitting out. It was the fire vein occupied by the puppet saint clan. Mo Heng had come here to refine the seal once. However, compared to the past, the intensity of the flames here was far stronger than before. Even Su Yu's newly matured saint body felt a little uncomfortable. He was almost sure that it had something to do with the extremely dangerous puppet. Dong. Su Yu was about to land when a voice came from the side to stop him. "Old guy, do you want to die? Is that a place you can go?" Looking sideways, he found that it was a strong ancient saint hiding in the dark. He was here to prevent any unknown enemies from above from affecting the refinement of the puppets. Su Yu pretended to look solemn. "There's a big problem up there. I must inform the ancestor as soon as possible." "What?" The strong ancient saint in the dark rushed out immediately. It was a short, red-faced man. Su Yu thought to himself that he could use the same trick to occupy his body and continue moving forward. He frowned and approached him with a solemn expression. He lowered his voice and said, "It's someone suspected to be the Cauldron Zune. He is attacking our stronghold outside." Hearing that it was Su Yu, the strong ancient saint's expression immediately became solemn. "Then we must inform the ancestor immediately." The ancient sage expert immediately made way for them. However, he suddenly realized something and stopped in his tracks. He shouted, "Something's wrong. You have never seen the Cauldron Zune. How do you know it's him who is attacking?" Seeing that he was about to be exposed, Su Yu raised his hands and slapped one of them on the top of his head and the other on the shoulder. All of a sudden, the soul exchange was completed. Su Yu entered the new body, and the short ancient saint entered the abandoned body. What was even more tragic was that he wanted to shout out and alert the people around him. Unexpectedly, as soon as his soul entered the body, his palm suddenly slapped on the top of his head. With a miserable groan, he fainted on the spot. The corners of Su Yu's mouth twitched. He picked him up with the tip of his foot and threw him into the space storage device. Now, he only needed to use this person's body to enter the place where the puppet was being refined. Through the short memory stored in the body, Su Yu already knew that Mo Heng was outside the puppet, being forced to refine the heart, and he was about to succeed. However, at this moment a strange change occurred. A wisp of silent fluctuation radiated in all directions. Su Yu suddenly noticed it and looked in the direction of the fluctuation. His face could not help but change. He saw that in the corner where the short ancient saint came from, there was a female ancient saint with a frightened face. In her hand a jade scroll was crushed. His eyes reflected everything that had happened here. Su Yu came to his senses and made a prompt decision. He tore the space apart and chased after the woman. The latter's face was full of fear. As she ran, she shouted loudly, "Help! An unknown enemy has broken in." At this moment, next to the fire vein, the puppet saint was trying hard to beat a beating flame heart. In the heart, a flickering blue liquid was flowing. Su Yu was no stranger to this object. It was the precious blue heart iron. Its function was that once it was damaged, it would recover immediately. It was extremely magical. Next to the heart, Mo Heng was dripping with sweat as he added all kinds of precious materials into the heart. He was also instructing the puppet saint on the strength and frequency of the beating. Their heart was about to succeed. Moreover, it was a heart made of blue heart iron. In addition, the puppet's entire body was made of blue heart iron. Once it succeeded, it would be a peerless divine puppet that could not be destroyed in the world. Chapter 3094. Just as they were concentrating on forging the blue core iron heart, the female ancient saint ran over with a flustered look on her face. Panting, she said, "Something bad has happened. Something bad has happened." The puppet ancestor, who was forging the iron heart, had to stop. What happened? Tell me quickly. The success of the blue core iron heart was imminent, and he had no time to care about such trivial matters. The female ancient saint said with a pale face, "Ancestor, the Cauldron Venerable has broken in." "What? Where is he?" the puppet ancestor asked. The puppet ancestor knew how powerful Su Yu was. After all, he was someone who could make Ancestor Qing Mu and the Netherworld ancestor bow before him. The most troublesome thing was that Su Yu had broken in. If Su Yu was outside, it would be fine. With the powerful giant puppet, he was not afraid of Su Yu and could fight him. However, now that Su Yu had broken in, he was in trouble. He has taken over the body of Ancient Saint Bai Yun. The female Ancient Saint said in shock. Taken over? The puppet ancestor was stunned. How? The Ancient Saint stammered, unable to say anything. She then said, "It's probably Su Yu's soul that took over Bai Yunga's soul, then took control of his body and pretended to be one of us. He was still chasing after me just now." Is that so? The puppet ancestor was shocked. It was not unusual for someone to take over another's body. As long as one's soul was strong enough, one could enter another's body and adapt to it. However, the premise was that it was just a soul without a body. If the soul existed in the body, no matter how strong the invading soul was, it would be impossible to take over the body by force. Moreover, Ancient Saint Bai Yun's soul was very strong. It was even more impossible to take over his body directly. "It's true," the female Ancient Saint said. She was on the verge of tears. "If you don't believe me, take a look at this." As if in response to her words, a wave came from afar. It was the message that she had sent earlier. Somehow, the message had arrived later than her. The puppet ancestor took the message and pressed it against his forehead. He saw that the Ancient Saint guarding the entrance had forcibly taken over Ancient Saint Bai Yun's soul. "It's true." The puppet ancestor was shocked. At the same time, his expression turned solemn. "Men!" With a loud roar, several hidden ancient sages rushed out from the vicinity of the puppet. They were here to guard the heart that was on the verge of success, to prevent it from being stolen. But now, they had received an urgent summons from the puppet ancestor. "Grand Ancestor, do you have any instructions?" the ancient sages asked. The puppet ancestor said solemnly, "All of you, immediately lead your people and seal off the surroundings. No one is allowed to enter. Remember, no one is allowed to enter, including our puppet saint tribe's people. Since Su Yu could invade other people's bodies at will, he could appear in any unexpected clansman's body. Now was the most critical moment in the refinement of the blue core iron heart. Nothing could go wrong." The female prime saint panted, "But are we just going to leave revered Cauldron here? Shouldn't they have gone to capture Su Yu?" The puppet ancestor said calmly, "The ultimate goal of revered Cauldron's invasion should be our puppets and Emoheng. As long as we protect them, everything will be fine. As for the clansmen who might encounter mishaps, we can only sacrifice them first." The female prime saint bit her red lips and said, "Despicable! Wait until we succeed in refining the heart. We must make revered Cauldron pay the price in blood." The puppet ancestor said, "Cut the crap. The refinement of the blue core iron heart is about to be completed. Help me collect the heart." The female prime saint looked at the burning heart with anticipation, but she was also a little confused. "How do I collect it?" The puppet ancestor said nothing and threw her a special small cauldron filled with liquid mysterious ice to ensure that nothing would be missing after the refinement of the heart was completed. Okay. The female prime saint nodded. She looked around worriedly to make sure that her clansmen were guarding nearby, and that Su-yu would not come for a while. Only then did she feel slightly relieved. She held the small cauldron and waited for the moment when the blue core iron heart was completed. The puppet ancestor's eyes focused on the blue core iron heart again. Because of the distraction just now, the surface of the blue core iron heart was fluctuating unsteadily. He hurriedly picked up the hammer and continued to forge. He urged Emoheng, who had stopped, "Hurry up! Don't stop!" Only then did Emoheng reluctantly continue to add materials to it and guide the puppet ancestor on how to refine it. The puppet ancestor said as he hammered, "Were you very excited just now? Did you think you were going to be saved?" Emoheng was silent. Ever since he was captured, Emoheng had thought of countless ways to escape. Unfortunately, he had not succeeded once. After being tortured several times by the puppet ancestor, Emoheng finally calmed down and started to refine the heart quietly. "Humph! Don't even think about escaping. As long as the blue core iron heart is not successfully refined, you can forget about leaving the puppet saint tribe," the puppet ancestor said harshly. Emoheng gritted his teeth slightly and said, "Puppet ancestor, I advise you one last time. Don't try to revive this puppet. Otherwise, you won't be able to bear the consequences. In my opinion, this puppet is definitely not a good weapon." The puppet ancestor's eyes were burning with passion as he continued to hammer the blue core iron heart without stopping. "The Abyss Puppet Branch has spent countless years to refine this puppet. How can I give it up so easily?" After pausing, a helpless and urgent expression appeared on his face. "Also, we don't have time." Emoheng's heart moved and he asked, "Who was the young man who came to visit your puppet saint tribe that day?" Originally, everyone from the puppet saint tribe, from the ancient sages to the puppet ancestor, had held a trace of respect for him. However, ever since the mysterious youth had left, the puppet ancestor seemed to have become a completely different person. He desperately wanted to refine the puppet as soon as possible. The puppet ancestor was silent for a moment before muttering, "If we can't refine the puppet, the entire hidden sky mountain, cloud desolate region, and myriad sovereign cave will be finished." "What?" Emoheng asked casually and actually found out something incredible. He continued to ask, "Why? Why do you say that?" The puppet ancestor said in a low voice, "Don't ask so much. You just need to know that if the blue core iron heart is successfully refined, perhaps I can protect you and help you pass through this great calamity." What kind of calamity could destroy an entire cave? What was it that forced the puppet ancestor to refine the god of destruction puppet at all costs? He wanted to tell this news to Su-yu so that they could prepare in advance, but there was no chance. At this moment, the blue core iron heart suddenly emitted a clear breathing sound. Then, the heart started to beat rhythmically as if it was alive. Emoheng's face fell. The scene that shouldn't have happened had finally happened. The heart was successfully refined. Chapter 3095. Seeing this, the puppet ancestor was overjoyed and laughed heartily. "Great! We finally succeeded. My Abyss Puppet Clan's countless years of painstaking effort is finally about to succeed." As long as this heart was placed in the puppet's chest, it would possess a certain level of consciousness and become the most powerful puppet in history. At that time, why would the sacred puppet clan be limited to a tiny Tsangtian mountain? The great changes that were about to occur in the future could also be safely weathered by the sacred puppet clan. "Puppet ancestor, think carefully," Emoheng shouted with a deep frown. "The material you used to refine this puppet is not ordinary, but a complete corpse of a myriad saint expert. Do you know what a myriad saint expert means? That is an existence that transcends the realm of living beings and is second only to the sacred mountains, son of heaven. Even a bone of a myriad saint expert is filled with danger after death, let alone a complete corpse. During the process of refining the heart, he had felt a great chill from the puppet more than once. His many years of refining experience told him that this puppet was absolutely ominous. The puppet ancestor chuckled coldly. "Emoheng, do you think you're the only smart person in the world and everyone else is a fool?" He took out a broken seal from his bosom and carefully stored it in a jade box. "Look at what this is." Through the jade box, he infused a strand of great saint power into it. Suddenly, a myriad of folded Buddha shadows appeared from the broken seal, chanting Sanskrit at the same time. Emoheng only felt that his heart was empty, and all distracting thoughts were gone. Even the anxiety in his heart at this moment had vanished. "Do you see it?" the puppet ancestor said proudly. "This is the sacred Buddha rune that our Abyss puppet clan spent countless efforts to steal from the Gautama Buddha's ancient tomb. It has the unparalleled power to suppress evil beings. Otherwise, why would we dare to refine a complete myriad saint expert's body?" The puppet ancestor took out the rune and stuck it on the puppet's body. Strands of Buddhist power turned into holy Sanskrit characters that densely covered the puppet's entire body like a giant invisible net that restrained it. Emoheng came to his senses, worry surging in his heart again. Even so, it's best not to give it a heart. The strength of a myriad saint expert is truly beyond your imagination. The famed sword sacred clan that he once belonged to could be considered an extremely powerful sacred clan. There were few in the world that could rival them. However, there was once an unknown 10,000 saint powerhouse who had just passed by and scared the 5 great saints of the clan into a state of panic, fearing that he was coming for them. That kind of fear originated from the lowly beings looking up to the gods. At that level, myriad saint experts had already surpassed the limits of living beings and were no longer ordinary living beings. The Abyss puppet race might not know what a 10,000 saints expert meant. Humph! How stubborn! The puppet patriarch lost his patience. "I've been talking to you for so long, but you're still going on and on. Since you don't believe me, then scram. Look after him." Ancient sacred drum nodded and immediately arrived in front of Emoheng. She stared at him and raised the small cauldron at the same time, saying, "Old ancestor, it's ready. Release the heart." At this moment, the blue heart iron heart was still being refined. There were many seals on its surface. If the seals were undone, the heart might fly away on its own. Someone had to catch it. The puppet patriarch nodded as he gripped the 8 chains sealing his heart with a greedy look in his eyes. Open! Crack! Under his great strength, the 8 chains broke one after another. The blue heart iron heart regained its freedom and flew away on its own. "Catch it!" the puppet patriarch shouted. Ancient sacred drum didn't dare to hesitate. She immediately threw out the small cauldron and prepared to catch the heart. However, just as the heart was about to be caught, Emoheng suddenly chanted an incantation. The heart seemed to have sensed it and flew toward Emoheng. He caught it first. It turned out that Emoheng had added something to the heart during the refinement process, which allowed him to control it easily. However, just as Emoheng was about to grab it, a black palm-sized puppet appeared behind him without any warning and slammed into his back. Puff! In an instant, Emoheng was sent flying. He opened his mouth and spat out a large mouthful of blood. The heart that he hadn't caught firmly fell out of his hand. The puppet patriarch retracted his palm and sneered. "Did you think I didn't know you had done something to the heart?" He wasn't blind. Emoheng thought he had done it flawlessly, but the puppet patriarch had still noticed it. He had endured it and kept his guard up against Emoheng. He had specially prepared a doctrine artifact with a concealment effect, ready to attack Emoheng at any time. It seemed that the effect was not bad. At the same time, the female ancient sacred drum leaped up and caught the heart with the small cauldron. The puppet patriarch laughed. "Well done. With the heart in hand, the next step was to put the heart into the body of the puppet and revive it completely. However, before the puppet patriarch could rejoice, a shocking scene appeared. The female ancient sacred drum didn't hand the small cauldron to him. Instead, she carried the seriously injured Emoheng, turned around and rushed out. The puppet patriarch was stunned for a moment. He immediately came to his senses and said in shock and anger, You are Suyu? The female ancient sacred drum turned around and chuckled. I've borrowed the heart. You have worked hard to refine it for so many years. Not bad. Her soul had been successfully replaced by Suyu. It turned out that the female ancient sacred drum didn't escape Suyu's pursuit. Her soul had been successfully replaced. Since the female ancient sacred drum had already sent a message, she pretended to be chased by Suyu to gain the trust of the puppet patriarch. The effect of this plan was not bad. The blue heart iron heart was successfully obtained. The puppet patriarch couldn't believe that the body that he had spent many years refining with the abyss puppet lineage was so easily snatched away by Suyu. Stop right there. The puppet patriarch came to his senses and roared furiously. At the same time, he immediately notified the ancient saints above him. Attack immediately and stop Suyu. Swish. Swish. Several ancient saints not far away were immediately mobilized. They rushed over one after another and attacked in anger. Suyu snorted. Although he didn't have a real body, no one could compete with him in the path of domain, especially the soul domain. Soul-chasing arrow. He opened his eyes wide, and two arrows that were almost tangible shot out. In an instant, two ancient sages screamed in agony as their souls were obliterated. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he rushed up through the encirclement and went straight to the head of the giant puppet. At this moment, the force of the cauldron also saw the opportunity to attack the puppet. Without anyone controlling the giant puppet, they successfully opened the gate of the puppet saint clan and charged in. Cauldron Master! The netherworld ancestor grabbed Suyu's body and shouted. Now that Suyu had replaced his body, no one knew which one was the real Suyu. Seeing his own body, Suyu felt relieved. It was time to end this. Chapter 3096. As long as he could control his own body, with the great scythe of calamity and the absolute heaven sword in his hands, as well as his mortal body, no one in the Tsangtian mountain would be a match for him. Swoosh! Suyu rushed over in the body of the female ancient saint and shouted at the netherworld ancestor, "Throw my body over here!" The netherworld ancestor immediately judged from her tone that the female ancient saint in front of him must be Suyu's soul. He immediately threw her body over. However, the puppet ancestor who was rushing over in midair was furious. With a flick of his palm, a chain quickly flew over, wrapped around Suyu's body and swept him away. Don't you like to exchange souls? Then continue to exchange them in other bodies. The puppet ancestor grabbed the neck of Suyu's body and squeezed it hard, making a cracking sound. Suyu's expression did not change. He turned around to take out the blue heart iron heart and squeezed it. Under the tremendous pressure, the heart was kneaded into a ball and almost shattered. That body is not mine. If you want to destroy it, then destroy it. It doesn't matter, Suyu said indifferently. What he said was half-truth. The truth was that it really was not his body. It belonged to Prince Mirrorflower. What was false was that the body was still very important and could not be destroyed at will. However, he believed that the blue heart iron heart was more important to the puppet ancestor. It was the blood and sweat of the abyss puppets for generations. If it was destroyed, many years of hard work would go to waste. Don't be stubborn. How can your body not be important? The puppet ancestor said. You give me back my heart and I give you my body. Let's call it even. How about that? Suyu said indifferently, No. He squeezed his palm even tighter. Give me back my body first. As for my heart, I will give it back to you later. Hearing that, the puppet ancestor snorted. Do you think I am a fool? Su Yu did not look like a pedantic person. If he really gave him his body, he might keep his promise and return his heart, but it would not be a complete heart. Hand over the body, hand over the heart, there is no other choice. The puppet ancestor shouted. Otherwise, instead of losing both the body and the money, it would be better to destroy your body and get rid of a big problem. Su Yu posed a great threat to him, and if he really had no other choice, he would have to destroy Su Yu's body to get rid of a big problem. The two sides immediately fell into a stalemate. Although the Ding's forces had won one victory after another and occupied the sacred puppet clan's territory step by step, it did not change the stalemate between the two sides. Just as both parties were in a deadlock, Su Yu suddenly felt a slight vibration beneath his feet. Like a ripple on the surface of the water, the aftershock spread out in all directions. The puppet race's ancestor was even more sharp. This was the place where the Abyss puppet race had lived for generations, so he was even more familiar with it. The abnormal fluctuation caused him to be astonished. Then, there was another clear movement, as if something was moving, creating a strong wave signal. What's going on? The puppet patriarch asked in surprise. Dong dong dong. The sound grew louder, clearer and closer to them. The cauldrons and sacred puppets fighting on the ground stopped fighting at the same time and looked down at the ground curiously, their faces full of confusion. Dong dong dong. The sound became clearer and clearer, and the puppet patriarch's expression began to become serious. He flew up into the sky and said, "Sacred puppets, leave the ground and leave the puppet." As soon as the order was given, the sacred puppets quickly withdrew from the puppet. Su Yu, who had always been vigilant, was even more so. He immediately ordered, "It turns out to be the sacred puppet clan now." The Cauldron's people also withdrew, and they were very far away from the puppet. Only Su Yu and the two ancestors remained in the sky above the puppet. The puppet patriarch looked down at the giant puppet that he had lived in for many years in shock. At this moment, he could see that the giant puppet was shaking slightly and was slowly sinking. It was as if it could not bear some gradually growing force and was being crushed into the ground. What is that? The puppet patriarch was sure that there must be something coming out from the bottom of the giant puppet. The first person he suspected was undoubtedly Su Yu. "Human, what have you done?" He couldn't believe that there was a force that could make their giant puppet so difficult to bear. What was Su Yu doing inside? Su Yu stared at the giant puppet below without blinking, and his expression was slightly solemn. "You should ask yourself what you just said." He had killed all the way to the puppet patriarch, so how could he have had time to set up other things? There must have been an unexpected upheaval in the giant puppet. Dong 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 dong. The rapid sound rang out, and the sound was like a war drum beating in everyone's heart. The cauldrons in the distance were fine, but the sacred puppets who had not gone far felt as if their chests were blocked by something. Their hearts were pounding, and it was difficult for them to breathe. They felt uncomfortable all over. Even the puppet patriarch, Qing Mu, and the netherworld patriarch felt extremely depressed. A great sense of crisis shrouded their hearts. The puppet patriarch slowly retreated and said in a stern voice, "Get away from the puppet! Don't get close to it!" Qing Mu and the netherworld patriarch also felt a chill in their hearts, and they could not help but retreat. Even Su Yu had to retreat, and his expression became more and more solemn. Although he did not feel as depressed as the three ancestors, chaotic lines of fate began to appear in his chest. Based on his years of experience, the chaotic lines of fate could only appear in front of a powerful enemy. Dong 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 dong. The sound of footsteps rang out 10 times in a row, as if they were about to leave the puppet. Everyone's hearts were in their throats, and they focused all their attention on the puppet. However, after the 10 footsteps, the sound stopped abruptly, as if it had been cut off. The inside of the puppet returned to peace, and the sky and the earth were all silent. However, the deathly silence did not make them feel at ease. Instead, it made their hearts clench tightly. The Greenwood Saint Clan swallowed hard, and he stared at the puppet's head without blinking. In the blink of an eye, the indestructible head of the puppet suddenly cracked open, and an invisible force swept out with an earth-shattering momentum, aiming at the Greenwood Saint Clan. The Greenwood Saint Clan did not even have time to react, and he was turned into a mist of blood by the finger. His soul also disappeared. A dignified strong man of the great Saint Clan was crushed by a finger just like that. The Netherworld Patriarch and the Puppet Patriarch were horrified, and they retreated crazily with goosebumps all over their bodies. In the distant scene before their eyes, a light blue figure, with chains and seals on his body, slowly walked out of the gap. He looked up into the sky, like a god of war looking down on the 9 heavens. Wherever he looked, the sky was burning with layers of raging flames, and fireballs fell from the sky, igniting the mountains, rivers, and earth. In an instant, the world was plunged into a sea of fire. Please remember the original domain name of this book. Mobile version website. Chapter 3097. Several masters present stared at the monster that suddenly appeared, and their expressions changed dramatically. The puppet ancestor exclaimed, "The Blue Heart Puppet!" The monster was none other than the Abyss Puppet Clan, a super puppet that had been forged with the skeleton of an all-saint strong man through countless generations of painstaking effort. The Blue Heart Puppet. Old ancestor, the puppet has come back to life. The ancient sages surrounded the old ancestor of the puppet tribe in horror. The Blue Heart Puppet clearly had no heart, and it had not been forged successfully. How could it have its own consciousness? How did it come back to life? In the crowd, Emohing said the truth calmly. The consciousness of this group of all-saint strong men has never died, and it has always been attached to the skeleton. It deceived the generations of Puppet Saint Clan, and you made its body into the Blue Heart Iron. The Blue Heart Iron was known as indestructible, and any damage could be repaired immediately. This skeleton had been forged into the material of the Blue Heart Iron by the Puppet Saint Clan for countless years, and it had become indestructible. Impossible! Our ancestors have examined it, and this skeleton no longer has any consciousness. The puppet ancestor said in disbelief. They wanted a puppet that could listen to their orders, not a living thing with its own consciousness. He could not believe that the Puppet Saint Clan's tempering for several eras was all for the all-saint strong man. It was even more difficult to believe that they had been kept in the dark for so many years. Emohing said in a low voice, as the Cauldron Master said, "You know nothing about the all-saint strong men. No matter what Suyu said, the Puppet Saint Clan believed in their own judgment too much, but reality slapped them hard in the face. Even a piece of bone of that kind of existence had incredible heavenly power, let alone a whole skeleton." The puppet ancestor felt as if he had been struck by 10,000 lightning bolts, and his mind trembled violently. He was lost for a long time, and it was difficult for him to recover. Even if he got the heart back now, it would be in vain. The puppet had deceived the Puppet Saint Clan, deceived him, and could not be forgiven. Emohing reminded him, "Puppet ancestor, in my opinion, that consciousness is not strong enough to exert the true strength of the all-saint skeleton, but if it obtains the heart, it will be a different story." His eyes flickered. In other words, this was the only time he could kill him. The Puppet Patriarch snapped out of his daze and glared at the Blue Heart Puppet with a vicious glint in his eyes. He gritted his teeth and said, "That's right. Since you didn't die, I'll let you die again." In his heart, he added another sentence. Only when his consciousness died would he be able to turn him into a true puppet. As he spoke, the puppet ancestor formed a seal with his hands and said coldly, "Fortunately, I stamped his body with the Buddha's seal." That talisman was a talisman of the Buddha that the puppets had found after rummaging through countless great tombs, and was capable of suppressing all evil entities in the world. This 10,000 saint expert's consciousness hadn't been extinguished for countless eras, which was enough to judge it as an evil being. The Puppet Patriarch's hands formed a seal, and he shouted, "Suppress!" Immediately, the dense Sanskrit runes on the Blueheart puppet's body tightened, binding the Blueheart puppet in place. The latter's hands and feet immediately closed, and he stood there with his back straight. He could not move at all, and even his head was enveloped by a layer of holy light. The puppet patriarch relaxed and smiled. "It's a success." He glanced at Emoheng and snorted softly. He had already said that the Puppet Saint clan was prepared to restrain the puppets. Emoheng's worries were groundless. However, both Su Yu and Emoheng kept retreating. Not only did they not heave a sigh of relief, but they became even more solemn. Su Yu had come into contact with the first ancestor. The first ancestor, whose abilities were not even at the level of a 10,000 saint, was already terrifyingly powerful. What more the corpse of a real 10,000 saint expert? It was not something that could be suppressed by a worn-out talisman. As expected, not long after the two of them retreated, they heard the sound of something snapping. When they looked, they saw that a thread of Sanskrit runes had snapped. The puppet patriarch's expression changed drastically. He formed another seal, trying to retract the net completely and restrain the Blueheart puppet. However, right at that moment, several snapping sounds rang out continuously. Lines of Sanskrit broke off one after another. From the belly of the Blueheart puppet, a gloomy and hoarse voice even sounded. "Even if the Buddha himself were to come, I would still be somewhat wary. Do you think a mere damaged rune can do anything to me?" It had spoken. Moreover, just as Su Yu and Emoheng had expected, the puppet's consciousness had been hidden all along, deceiving the Puppet Saint clan to refine its remains. "Break!" With a single word, the tightly bound Blueheart puppet slowly raised its arm. The Sanskrit runes on its body shattered in large numbers. When its arm was completely freed, it grabbed all the Sanskrit runes on its body and threw them fiercely. Creak! All the runes on its body were torn apart in an instant. The puppet patriarch's hands, which were forming seals, shook violently and were forcefully shaken away. He was extremely shocked. The talisman had failed. He could not help but retreat, his heart trembling. His eyes began to show fear, and there was an uncontrollable sense of panic in his heart. However, the Blueheart puppet did not ignore him just because he retreated. Its eyes, which were filled with dancing flames, shot straight at him. The corners of its mouth formed a line, revealing a human-like mocking smile. "As the benefactor who forged my body, I shall gift your entire clan with an opportunity." It raised its palms, clasped them in front of its body, and recited an obscure incantation. Swish! A layer of solid blue crystals rapidly swept in all directions, with it as the center. The blue crystals swept through the rocks, grass, and trees without any abnormalities. However, when they came into contact with the corpses scattered nearby, they immediately turned into blue crystals. This scene was somewhat familiar to Su Yu. It was extremely similar to the Blueheart demonic armor. However, this time, its power was much greater. Seeing this, the puppet patriarch's pupils shrank. Blueheart wave. He was furious and resentful. As he retreated frantically, he roared, "All members of the Puppet Saint clan, retreat! Retreat!" At this moment, he no longer held any hope for the puppet. The Blueheart wave was a special attack that the Puppet Saint clan had specially created for the puppet. It could crystallize all living creatures within a 100-mile radius, killing them with a single touch. Never in their wildest dreams would they have thought that the first time the puppet used it, it would be against the Puppet Saint clan. As for why this was so, the reason was simple. The Blueheart puppet was created by the Puppet Saint clan, so the one who understood it the most was, of course, the Puppet Saint clan. In order to prevent the Blueheart puppet from exposing its weaknesses, the first thing it did was to exterminate the Puppet Saint clan that had created it. Looking at the retreating Puppet Saint clan, the Blueheart puppet laughed sinisterly. It pointed its finger in the air, and the Blueheart wave swept out at an even more astonishing speed. In the vicinity, Only the members of the Puppet Saint clan had not escaped far. As they fled in terror, they were immediately swept by the wave. In an instant, they collectively turned into blue crystals, which then fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. Even the Puppet Patriarch, who had the highest cultivation, had half of his body crystallized. 8:00 p.m. Please remember this book's original domain name, mobile version website. Chapter 3098. In the blink of an eye, the Puppet Saint clan was almost wiped out. Only the Puppet Ancestor was left, and he was only half dead. All of this was caused by a single attack from the Blue Heart Puppet. Witnessing this scene with his own eyes, Su Yu's expression was calm, his heart unmoved. They had brought this upon themselves, and they could not blame anyone else. Both he and Emoheng had reminded them time and time again not to underestimate the remains of the 10,000 Saints experts. However, from the Patriarch of the Puppets to the ordinary members of the clan, they were all so full of themselves that they had no idea that they were doing something that could endanger the entire clan and the entire world. In the end, there was something wrong with the Blue Heart Puppet, and the first thing it did after it was born was to destroy the Puppet Saint clan. The Puppet Ancestor looked at the ground littered with the crystallized corpses of his clansmen and screamed in despair, "Blue Heart! Clang! Puppet!" Unfortunately, his screams could not change the situation. Everything was in vain. The Blue Heart Puppet looked over disdainfully and bent its finger toward the Puppet Ancestor, preparing to flick its finger. With the Puppet Ancestor's current state of half-crystallization, a flick of its finger could kill him. Clang! With a flick of its finger, a sharp blue wave of light shot toward the Puppet Ancestor's back. At this moment, the Puppet Patriarch was only half dead. How could he resist the Blue Heart Puppet's attack? His eyes were filled with despair and regret. If he had known this would happen, he would not have done it in the first place. If he had listened to Su Yu and Emoheng's advice, he would not have ended up like this. It was too late to say anything now. However, just as the blue wave of light was about to reach him, a blue palm suddenly appeared in front of the Puppet Ancestor without warning, blocking it. It was none other than Su Yu. In the distance, Emoheng was startled, looking at Su Yu in confusion. "Cauldron Zun, come back quickly." The Blue Heart Puppet was so terrifying, but Su Yu had actually taken the initiative to attract its attention, and for the sake of the Puppet Ancestor? To be honest, he felt that the Puppet Ancestor deserved to die and should not have been saved. Su Yu's expression was calm. He released his palm, and the blue wave of light that shot toward him was crushed into dust by his blue-gloved hand. "Without the lips, the teeth will feel the cold. Our current enemy is the Blue Heart Puppet," Su Yu said calmly. Although the Puppet Ancestor was the culprit, their top priority now was not to settle who was responsible, but to eliminate the enemy in front of them together. He turned around to glance at the Puppet Tribe's ancestor and said, "Do you want to avenge your clansmen?" The Puppet Patriarch had just narrowly escaped death, and his rough face was replaced by grief and indignation. "Human, don't try to provoke me. I know what you want to say. From now on, I'm on your side until this puppet is destroyed." Su Yu nodded. "That would be for the best." All of a sudden, the internal blood energy channels in Su Yu's body started to vibrate rhythmically, as if something was controlling them. He glanced sideways and keenly noticed that the Puppet Patriarch's lips were moving slightly. Su Yu rolled his eyes and calmed his heart to listen to the beating of the meridians. He gradually understood that this was some secret technique of the Abyss Puppet that stimulated the meridians of others to beat. His original intention was to impart a legacy that only certain meridians could withstand, but at this moment, he was passing on some words. "Cover me as I enter the puppet. With this puppet, we might be able to destroy this Blue Heart Puppet." The Puppet Patriarch told Su Yu in such a peculiar way of transmitting words. They were facing the Blue Heart Puppet of the All Saints level. Even soul transmission could be detected by the other party, and their intentions could be seen through. Therefore, they could only use this special method of transmission. Suyu nodded lightly without batting an eyelid. He raised his hand, and the blue heart demonic armor on his body completely covered his body. Facing the skeleton of the All Saints of the past, Suyu did not dare to be careless. With the blue heart demonic armor on his body, Suyu took out the Absolute Heaven Sword. With the sword in hand, a peerlessly fierce light burst forth. At the same time, an oil lamp floated above Suyu's head, flickering with flickering waves of light. That was the power of the saint body. Moreover, with a wave of his left hand, the great scythe of 10,000 calamity appeared. The chaotic energy in his body surged wildly into it, urging it to the extreme. Facing it, Suyu was fully armed and prepared. "You have some assets." The blue heart puppet looked at Suyu from afar and laughed hoarsely. "Even in my era, the things you have on you are considered decent top-notch items. It's a pity that it's a waste to use them on you," the blue heart puppet said. "Why don't you let me have them?" It opened its mouth and spat at Suyu abruptly. A bolt of blue lightning pierced through the space and directly passed through Suyu's body. The heart of the puppet's ancestor, who was watching the battle from afar, sank. Suyu, the strongest of the Tsangtian mountain, was finished just like that? They were all finished. There was no hope for anything. However, the blue heart puppet's eyes narrowed, and it said indifferently, "The domain of time and space? That's a little surprising." Everyone immediately looked up. Suyu, who was reflected in their eyes, turned into a phantom and dissipated. The blue heart puppet suddenly turned around and raised its palm to strike the void behind it. There, Suyu's imposing posture appeared without warning. From above, a sword and a scimitar slashed down at the same time. Clang! The sword and scimitar struck the palm of the blue heart puppet, but they did not cut it in the slightest. Only sparks were produced on its palm. Suyu's heart trembled violently. He had used 70% of his strength, but he could not even scratch the skin of his opponent. Wasn't the blue heart puppet a little too powerful? At that moment, its meridians throbbed again. It was the anxious voice of the puppet's ancestor. "It has two weaknesses. One is in the chest, where the heart has not been embedded, and the other is under the armpit." Suyu could not help but be annoyed. Why didn't it say so earlier? At that moment, he could only retreat temporarily. But the blue heart puppet had countless eras of combat experience, and it was once a true all-saint strong man. How could it miss such a fleeting opportunity to strike? The palm that was blocking the sword and scimitar suddenly erupted with an incomparably rich blue light beam. The light beam came into contact with the air and immediately materialized. It was like a wooden stick that extended infinitely, and it stabbed towards Suyu's head fiercely. But Suyu's combat experience was just as rich. Before his opponent struck, he had already anticipated its attack. Immediately, a remnant mark was drawn in the air. The ancestral soul technique appeared immediately, and in an instant, a dense fog was condensed in front of the blue heart puppet. Although the body of the blue heart puppet was strong, it had a fatal weakness. That was, its consciousness was not at the level of all saint. Its consciousness was at most 1/10,000th of that of a true all-saint strong man. Suyu's ancestral soul technique still had an effect on it. As expected, the blue heart puppet immediately lost its target. A hint of surprise finally appeared in its indifferent tone. "Ancestral soul technique? Who are you?" If it was just the area of time and space, he could understand. After all, the marriage between the people of the two great areas might produce offspring who could be proficient in both areas. But how could this person be proficient in even the ancestral soul technique? If he remembered correctly, the complete ancestral soul technique had long been lost due to the plotting of the Saint Mountain's emperor. There is one more chapter to be updated tomorrow morning. Please remember this book's original domain name, mobile version website. Chapter 3099. The current Soul Saint clan did not even have ancestral technique. Where did this person learn them from? But that was not important. Fortunately, your level is still low, and your soul is not strong enough. Otherwise, you would have been in danger. The blue heart puppet waved its arm, and a wave of blue light swept across, dispersing all the fog in front of it. Not far away, Su Yu's retreating figure appeared. The blue heart puppet grinned. Kid, I have come to this world and need people. If you give me your heart and follow me from now on, you will receive many benefits in the future. After a pause, it said faintly, I might even give you the opportunity to become a strong fighter of the 10,000 saints. The former was fine, as it was all empty talk. Who knew what the so-called benefits were? But the opportunity to become a strong fighter of the 10,000 saints was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It was not something that could be obtained just by luck. Who wouldn't be tempted? Especially the strong fighters of the great saints present. Forget it. I am free to do whatever I want, and I am not used to being restrained by others, Su Yu said lightly. The blue heart puppet's smile faded. Then you should just die. Before the last word left its mouth, its figure had already blurred. In the distance, Su Yu's expression changed, and he was about to dodge. But an icy voice came from behind him. Why do you think I am talking nonsense with an ant? Of course, it was to divert Su Yu's attention and give him a fatal blow. It could not be bothered to take in a creature with such a low cultivation level as Su Yu's as a follower. Even if it wanted to, it should be at the peak of the great saint level. Su Yu's pupils shrank and his body stiffened. Before he could react, he felt a chill in his chest. An iron claw had pierced through Su Yu's chest. In an instant, fresh blood sprayed out, splattering all over the ground. The blue heart puppet clenched its fist, instantly shattering Su Yu's body. At the same time, it grabbed an aquamarine round pearl. That was the only space-type item on Su Yu's body. The blue heart iron heart could only be hidden in it. Ha ha! Finally! The blue heart puppet laughed hoarsely, instantly activating the aquamarine round pearl. Unexpectedly, the moment it was opened, the dark green bead suddenly turned golden and exploded at the same time. At the same time, Su Yu's remains, which had collapsed into flesh and blood, turned into fluorescent light and disappeared from the world. The blue heart puppet's pupils constricted. It immediately realized that it had been tricked. What he had killed was not the real Su Yu, but the illusory soul technique. In the blink of an eye, the blue heart puppet had tossed away the golden bead the instant it exploded. However, in the instant he threw it away, a mighty freeze resounded between heaven and earth. The powerful energy of time flowed over like a flood and swept through the surroundings, causing everything to be frozen in place. Even the blue heart puppet was no exception. Its body froze for an instant. Although it was short, it was enough. Bang! There was an intense explosion, and the blue heart puppet was instantly engulfed in fiery light. Large cracks appeared on its skeleton. The golden bead was none other than a powerful self-destructing weapon that he had snatched from Little Skeleton. Its might was comparable to that of a peak great sage. Although the blue heart puppet's body was tyrannical and invincible, its consciousness was weak. Such a powerful explosion was unable to destroy its body, but it could injure its soul. As expected, the blue heart puppet let out a miserable groan and staggered backwards. Just as it was retreating, a gust of cold wind appeared without warning, piercing its empty back. The puppet's ancestor had said that one of its two weaknesses was its back. If it could injure the inside, it might be able to inflict real damage on the blue heart puppet. What makes you think that I don't know that you were just stalling for time? Su Yu said indifferently as he appeared. Although he had only been cultivating for 200 years, he had experienced countless life-and-death battles in his life. He had seen insignificant tricks like this countless times. Trying to deceive him was merely giving him a chance to beat him at his own game. Clang! However, unexpectedly, just as the absolute heaven sword was about to stab into the hole in its back, the blue heart puppet suddenly had an idea. Contrary to its usual behavior, it used its right fist to stab into the hole in its chest, using its fist as the heart to protect the hole. The absolute heaven sword pierced the other party's fist, causing violent sparks to fly. At the same time, the powerful recoil shook Su Yu's arm so much that the absolute heaven sword almost flew out of his hand. The blue heart puppet slowly turned its head, its eyes filled with murderous intent. You deserve to die. Boom. The fist in its heart suddenly shot out a solid beam of blue light, piercing through Su Yu at close range. At such a close distance and so sudden, anyone else would have died without a doubt. Su Yu had plotted many times, but in the end, he had still been defeated by the absolute disparity in strength. Puff! The blue beam of light instantly pierced through Su Yu, turning his body into a blue crystal. Finally, it fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. Let's see if you can still die. The blue heart puppet coldly snorted, grabbing the absolute heaven sword with a greedy look in its eyes. This time, it should be Su Yu's true body that was killed. After all, the body could be deceived with illusions, but this sword, which was filled with a vast murderous aura, could not be created with illusions. However, just as the blue heart puppet grasped the absolute heaven sword, a blood-red line on the sword hilt suddenly compressed. That was because the resentful spirits had temporarily given up on suppressing the absolute heaven sword. The absolute heaven sword's own consciousness suddenly erupted, and it uncontrollably attacked the blue heart puppet. The sudden scene caught the blue heart puppet off guard. It had no choice but to grip the absolute heaven sword tightly to avoid harming itself. However, right at that moment, a scene that the blue heart puppet had not expected occurred. Su Yu, who should have been dead, appeared out of thin air on the right side of its body. Then, with the great scythe of 10,000 calamity, he slashed at the puppet's right armpit from below with lightning speed. This attack was so sudden that even the onlookers did not expect it. The blue heart puppet, who was concentrating on suppressing the absolute heaven sword, was even more surprised. What? The blue heart puppet's heart shook violently. Could it be that what it had just killed was Su Yu's illusions? How was that possible? Could it be that, from the start of the fight until now, all of its attacks had been predicted by the other party? Was that some kind of secret technique that could predict the future? No. It was not a secret technique. If it was a secret technique that could predict the future, there would definitely be traces of the secret technique being used. Moreover, that kind of secret technique could only be predicted when the situation was absolutely stable. Usually, a third party would predict the future and inform the battle partner. It was impossible to predict the future while fighting. However, if the other party had only relied on his brain to calculate, the power of his calculations was too incredible. He was a dignified, strong man of the 10,000 saints, and any one of his moves could destroy the heavens and the earth. How could he predict this? In fact, that was indeed the truth. From the very beginning, Su Yu had not locked onto its heart, but its armpit. Everything that had happened before, including allowing the puppet to obtain the real absolute heaven sword, had been Su Yu's intention. He wanted the puppet to let down its guard and mistakenly believe that the person it had killed the second time was the real Su Yu. However, he did not expect that the real Su Yu had only just made his move. Updates will continue at 8:30 p.m. Please remember the domain name of this book, mobile version. Chapter 3100. After a series of calculations, Su Yu had finally found the perfect opportunity to strike. In the blink of an eye, Su Yu pushed the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations to the limit and accurately struck the opponent's armpit. The other parts of the blue heart puppet were extremely hard. Even the absolute heaven sword and the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations could not harm it. But right now, the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations had easily cut into the blue heart puppet's bones. Ah! The blue heart puppet seemed to have been tortured. Even though it was a 10,000 saint, it let out a shrill scream. Based on its experience, this kind of injury should not have caused it to react in the slightest. but now it was in such excruciating pain. Just as the puppet's ancestor had said, the armpit was one of its fatal weaknesses. As expected, on the surface of the Blue Heart puppet's body, the Blue Heart iron, which had been tempered for countless years, began to bubble, as if it was about to break free from the Blue Heart puppet. Suyu was delighted. He used all the strength in his body to flick the Blue Heart iron toward its armpit. If this had been a normal flick, it would have been enough to strike a fatal blow and kill it. But was the Blue Heart puppet an ordinary person? It clamped its right arm, using its arm's strength to clamp the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations under its armpit, preventing Suyu from continuing to strike. If it had been an ordinary person, they would probably have been at a loss. But who was Suyu? At the critical moment, Suyu did not hesitate to activate his mature human saint body. A turbulent, majestic power of the saint body surged into his palm. His strength increased by 30%. With a forceful flick, he broke free from the Blue Heart puppet's restraints, and the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations sliced down from above. Ah! The Blue Heart puppet screamed. But the moment the great scythe of 10,000 tribulations lost control, its body tilted to one side. The great scythe of 10,000 tribulations did not slash down toward its armpit. Instead, it cut off its right arm. Its right arm, along with the absolute heaven sword in its hand, was severed. A blue pearl could be seen where the arm was severed. It was none other than the Blue Heart pearl that provided the Blue Heart puppet with an endless supply of energy. The Blue Heart iron was attached to the skeleton, and it could only be maintained with energy. This Blue Heart bead was an important source of energy, second only to the Blue Heart iron heart. Once it was lost, the Blue Heart iron on the skeleton would peel off, just like the bubbles that had just appeared. Without the Blue Heart iron, there was a limit to how strong the 10,000 saint experts' corpse was. With their strength, they could completely suppress it. Unfortunately, the Blue Heart puppet dodged instinctively at the last moment, causing Suyu's efforts to be in vain. "I'll kill you!" The Blue Heart puppet was completely exposed. Never in his dreams would he have thought that he would actually suffer the sneak attack of a puny human and nearly lose his life. Suyu's reaction was extremely fast. Since his plan had failed, he didn't have any time to be depressed. He grabbed the severed arm and the absolute heaven sword with a backhand, then quickly left. When the Blue Heart puppet fought back, Suyu used the same trick once again and displayed the soul mist. The Blue Heart puppet, which had suffered a great loss, became cautious. After dispersing the dense fog, it saw Suyu, who was not far away. However, it did not dare to attack recklessly, for fear of falling into the enemy's hands again. The two forefathers, Emo Heng and the rest who were watching from afar, all gasped. If they had not witnessed it with their own eyes, they would have found it hard to believe that a person who had not even reached the ancient Saint Realm was able to fight against a greater Saint Realm expert with a scheme. No, he had the upper hand. Not only had he almost killed the opponent, but he had also chopped off one of the opponent's arms. Whoosh! The ripples beside the two of them shook, and Suyu appeared. He put away the absolute heaven sword, and the severed arm in his hand underwent a drastic change. The Blue Heart iron on it lost its power, turning into bubbles. After the bubbles burst, the Blue Heart iron quickly cracked. A large area of the Blue Heart iron peeled off and fell. Suyu immediately kept the Blue Heart iron that had fallen, not leaving a single bit behind. These were all rare treasures, how could he waste them? Apart from that, there was also a complete severed arm of the Greater Saint. Even as he held it in his hand, Suyu could feel a frightening power that made him shudder with fear. If you could use it, this arm could become an unparalleled weapon that could injure people. He exerted a sealing spell, and kept the arm as well. The Blue Heart puppet, who had noticed this scene from afar, had a sinister expression. The blue flames in its eyes danced intensely. It said in a low voice, "Human, you have really angered me." A boundless murderous aura quickly swept over with it as the epicenter. Su Yu's expression was calm, and he said indifferently, "You speak as if you would have shown me mercy if I hadn't provoked you." From its actions after it had appeared, it was obvious that it wanted to kill everyone present. "No. If you hadn't provoked me, you would have died. But if you provoked me, you would have suffered a fate worse than death." Swoosh, as soon as it finished speaking, the blue heart puppet disappeared into thin air. Without a doubt, its words just now were to stall for time, to attract the attention of Su Yu and the others so that it could teleport through time and kill them with a single blow. But right at that moment, the giant puppet, whose body was half buried in the ground in the Saint Clan's territory, suddenly opened its eyes. A towering giant palm stretched out from the ground abruptly, slamming into the air. Bang! That palm actually cut off the blue heart puppet, whose speed was so fast that it could teleport through time. The giant palm slammed down fiercely, slapping the blue heart puppet, who was caught off guard, onto the ground and pinning it down. Rumble, at the same time, the giant puppet crawled out of the ground, its enormous, majestic figure covering the sky and the sun. Su Yu revealed a look of relief. He had fought the blue heart puppet with all his might, but it was not a desperate battle. He was only stalling for time for the puppet ancestor. It would be best if he could kill the blue heart puppet, but even if he couldn't, he could still buy enough time for the puppet ancestor to use the giant puppet. Now it seemed that they had succeeded. "Damn it, you have deceived the Abyss Puppet Clan for several eras. You can't absolve yourself from death." The puppet ancestor was furious. Not only had the Abyss Puppet Clan been deceived for several eras, but they had also almost been wiped out. How could the puppet ancestor feel at ease if he did not destroy such a deep-seated hatred? The blue heart puppet had been attacked twice, and it was furious. It used one arm to prop itself up from the ground, using its own body to prop up the giant puppet's palm. "You bunch of ants are the ones who should be ground to dust," the blue heart puppet roared, pushing up with one arm with all its might. The giant puppet lost control of its body, and it staggered and almost fell to the ground. Fortunately, the puppet ancestor's skills were superb, and he stepped on it in time. Bang! The entire Songtian mountain trembled violently because of this stomp. The blue heart puppet's body let out an unbearable explosive sound, and under the nervous gazes of the crowd, it burst into pieces in an instant. The people watching from afar all cheered wildly. It was hard to believe that they had really killed a strong fighter of all saints who had appeared out of nowhere. Only Su Yu and the few ancestors remained solemn. They could feel that although the blue heart puppet's body had been destroyed, its consciousness was unharmed. Updated tomorrow morning. Chapter 3101. As expected, the crushed fragments of the blue heart puppet wriggled and gathered together again, quickly reassembling into a complete blue heart puppet. Seeing this, the cheering crowd felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over them, and their hearts turned cold. The puppet ancestor's face was especially gloomy. After countless years of refinement, the blue heart puppet had already achieved an indestructible blue heart iron body. Even if its body was shattered, it could recover instantly. It was impossible to kill it. With a hint of despair in his eyes, he shouted in a low voice, "Lie down." The giant palm stomped down fiercely, crushing the blue heart puppet into pieces again. However, it had no effect. The blue heart puppet immediately recovered. Then, as the puppet ancestor stomped on it again and again, the blue heart puppet recovered again and again. Every time, it made the people present feel a little more despair. Stomp, stomp. Thanks to you, I already have an indestructible body. The blue heart puppet laughed ferociously. When you can't stomp anymore, it will be time for me to slaughter all of you. The giant puppet controlled by the puppet ancestor relied on energy to function. It could not be stomped endlessly. Eventually, there would be a time when its energy would be exhausted. When that time came, there would be no powerful force that could compete with the invincible body of the blue heart puppet. It would be the end of the entire Songtian mountain. The faces of the Greenwood ancestor and the Netherworld ancestor were gloomy. They had provoked an existence that would not leave them alone. It was dangerous, unkillable, and full of murderous intent to take revenge on them. Cauldron Zune, what should we do? The Greenwood ancestor looked at Suyu. Among them, only Suyu might have a way to compete with the Blue Heart puppet. However, unexpectedly, Suyu said seriously, "Inform the sinful lady to lead the cauldron and all the members of the cauldron out of the Tsangtian mountain. The further the better." Retreat? When the two ancestors heard this, their hearts sank. Even the Cauldron Zune could do nothing about it. No, with the Blue Heart puppet's indestructible body, who could do anything to it? The Netherworld ancestor pondered. "Cauldron Zune, why don't you try to attack again and attack its vital parts? Didn't Suyu almost destroy the Blue Heart pearl on his arm and kill him just now? If he could do it again, he would definitely succeed." However, Suyu shook his head slightly, his gaze fixed on the Blue Heart puppet that was continuously recovering. He asked, "Would you fall at the same place twice?" The Netherworld old ancestor understood what Suyu meant and sighed silently. What a pity! Just now, Suyu had performed a series of tricks and almost dealt a fatal blow to the Blue Heart puppet. That was his only chance. Having learned its lesson, the Blue Heart puppet would not give Suyu any more chances. "If I attack now, it will give the Blue Heart puppet a chance to escape." Suyu understood. The reason the Blue Heart puppet had been continuously crushed was because it hadn't had a chance to attack. Every time it recovered, it would be crushed by the puppet patriarch. If Suyu, the third party, intervened, perhaps the Blue Heart puppet could use an external force to break free from the cycle of destruction. By then, it would not be easy to trample on the Blue Heart puppet. "Do as I say. Immediately command all the creatures on the Tsangtian mountain to retreat. If they are unwilling, let them be," Suyu said. There were still a small number of forces on the Tsangtian mountain who had not joined the cauldron. If they were willing to listen to Suyu's advice, then so be it. If not, Suyu had no time to care about them. What about Cauldron Zune? The Greenwood ancestor understood what Suyu was implying. It would be more convincing if he went himself. Why did he ask them to go? Suyu said, "I will stay here and try to buy more time for you. Go now." The Greenwood ancestor and the Netherworld old ancestor were moved. At the juncture of life and death, Suyu had not abandoned them. Instead, he was using his life to buy time for them. This was easy to say, but how many people in the world could actually do it? Most leaders use their forces as tools to protect their own interests, but Suyu was the only one who would use his own life to protect the interests of the forces under his command. The Greenwood ancestor had been hesitant, but now he had made up his mind. He had been hesitant about whether to join the cauldron completely. He had only been tempted because the Netherworld old ancestor had removed his clan and completely integrated into the cauldron. But now there was no more hesitation. Such a leader was hard to find in the world. What else did the Greenwood Divine clan have to hesitate about? "We await the return of the Cauldron Master." The two ancestors bowed and immediately went back to inform everyone to retreat. Suyu leaped onto the head of the giant puppet and said, "Puppet Ancestor, is there anything else you need to say?" At this point, the puppet ancestor could neither escape nor kill the Blue Heart puppet. In the end, the giant puppet could only be killed by the Blue Heart puppet after it lost its power. As an old monster who had lived for countless years, he should have understood this. The puppet ancestor's voice was hoarse, and his eyes were full of sorrow. "One careless move and we lost everything. We, the Abyss puppets, asked for it, and we have nothing to do with anyone. I don't blame anyone. In fact, I should thank you for snatching the Blue Heart Iron Heart and preventing this crafty, all-saint strong man from succeeding," the puppet ancestor said with a sigh. "If he had obtained the Blue Heart Iron Heart, I probably wouldn't even be able to crush him now. By then, he would really be invincible in the world, and we, the Abyss puppets, would not be able to rest in peace." Fortunately, you snatched the heart, and he is still not a complete blue heart iron puppet. Suyu listened silently. He knew that the puppet ancestor must have other instructions. You can take the heart with you. Find a suitable puppet or a suitable body, and fuse the heart into it. That way, you might be able to create a different existence. The puppet ancestor's voice was getting hoarser and hoarser, and he was even a little tired. Manipulating the giant puppet consumed a lot of his energy. Suyu understood what he was implying. The blue heart puppet could be fused into the body of a living creature? This was an artificial heart. This is the secret technique to fuse the heart. Remember it well. The puppet ancestor once again passed on the fusion technique to Suyu through the technique of vibrating the meridians. Suyu accepted it silently and said, "Is there anything else?" The puppet ancestor chuckled. "I would like to ask you to avenge the abyss puppets, but that is not realistic." The blue heart puppet had reached the point of immortality, and no one in the world could kill it. It was even more impossible for Suyu to do so. "I have nothing to tell you. I only hope that if you can find the other branches of the abyss puppets, you must pass on the ancestral techniques that we, the abyss puppets, have mastered to them." The puppet ancestor's voice was filled with infinite sorrow. A scripture, flickering with fluorescent light, gushed out of the giant puppet's body and landed in front of Suyu. Updated at 8:30 p.m. Please remember the domain name of this book. Mobile version. Chapter 3102. The scriptures were all written in the language of the heavenly book. Suyu glanced at them and saw the ancestral technique flickering. Suyu grasped it, his heart inexplicably touched. Of all things in the world, only living creatures had sustenance outside of life. Their entire race had been destroyed, but they still hoped that their heritage would not be destroyed, so that their race could continue to exist in the world in another form. This was the pleading of life for continuation. It was both humble and worthy of respect. "I will." Suyu clenched it tightly and added, "Also, I will avenge you. Leave the blue heart puppet to me." The puppet ancestor smiled with difficulty. "Then, thank you very much." A smile was all that mattered, not to mention that there was no life and death feud between them. Suyu cupped his fists and turned to the foot of the giant puppet. Looking at the blue heart puppet that had been restored, he took out the blue heart iron heart and said lightly, "If you want the heart, come and find me. If it's gone, I can't guarantee that I will use it on someone else." As he spoke, he flew off in another direction. The blue heart puppet was furious. "Stop right there." The blue heart puppet's body had already been refined for an epoch. During this epoch, it had endured the entire time, not revealing the existence of its consciousness, all so that the idiots of the sacred puppet race could refine the blue heart iron heart for it. For this, it had waited for an entire era in torment. In the end, when it finally succeeded, Suyu suddenly appeared and snatched it away. It struggled with all its might, trying to break free from the giant puppet's suppression. "Humph! Where do you think you're going?" The puppet ancestor snorted coldly and stepped down, crushing the blue heart puppet. The latter was furious. "Old thing! I will grind your bones to dust." Looking at the furious blue heart puppet, the puppet ancestor could not help but laugh. "Evil creature! You want the blue heart iron heart? Dream on!" As he spoke, he kept crushing the blue heart puppet with his foot. The latter was angry but could not get rid of it. It could only be delayed in its anger and curses. One day passed. The giant puppet's continuous stomps caused the entire Cauldron mountain to sink by 1/10. But the blue heart puppet was indeed made of blue heart iron. Even though the giant puppet had used up most of its energy, it was still in perfect condition. The puppet ancestor panted, his red face turning pale. He looked at Cauldron Mountain, which had been completely evacuated half a day ago, and murmured, "I have tried my best." Looking at the Cauldron Mountain that he had been familiar with for an epoch, the puppet patriarch sighed with emotion. He had never thought that there would be a day where he would sacrifice himself to buy time for the forces he looked down on in Hidden Sky Mountain. Take care of yourselves. The puppet patriarch sighed deeply and slumped to the ground. The giant puppet's energy was exhausted, and its footsteps became slower and slower. Finally, when the Blueheart puppet reformed from its fragmented state, before the giant puppet's foot had even landed, the Blueheart puppet finally had a chance to attack. Bang! Blueheart's puppet suddenly raised its right arm, blocking the giant puppet's foot. No matter how much strength the giant puppet exerted, it was unable to shatter the foot. Now, are you ready to bid farewell to this world? The Blueheart puppet revealed a sinister smile. It wrapped its arms around the giant puppet's foot, and then, with a furious roar, it unleashed a mountain-moving, sea-draining force. It lifted the giant puppet, which was 100 times its size, and fiercely smashed it onto the ground. Rumble, with this smash, Songtian Mountain was shaved off by 30%. Several cracks had also appeared on the giant puppet, and the puppet patriarch in the control room was vomiting blood incessantly. But this was only the beginning. As if taking revenge, the Blueheart puppet threw the giant puppet back and forth. Songtian Mountain, one of the best spiritual lands in the cloud-desolate territory, was razed to the ground, revealing the spiritual veins hidden beneath the ground. Then, the spiritual veins violently shook and were destroyed. As for the giant puppet, after several violent collisions, it was finally unable to bear the burden and broke apart. The right leg that the Blueheart puppet was holding was directly separated from its body. The colossal body of the giant puppet crashed to the ground. Flickering sparks were emitting from all over its body, and thick black smoke was rising from its body. The Blueheart puppet grinned sinisterly as it walked to the giant puppet's head. With a stomp of its foot, the head instantly shattered, revealing the puppet ancestor who was on the verge of death. It jumped in and looked down at the puppet ancestor on the ground with its hands behind its back. It said in an incomparably sinister voice, "Old thing, are you ready to die?" The puppet ancestor's expression was calm. He looked at the Blueheart puppet and laughed. "How I die is not up to you to decide." "HM?" The Blueheart puppet sensed that something was amiss. It looked around and suddenly discovered that the puppet ancestor's hand, which was pressing down on the ground, seemed to be holding something. When it looked closely, it saw that it was an extremely eye-catching blood-red handle, as if it was some important mechanism. The Blueheart puppet's heart jumped. It realized that something was wrong and was about to leave. However, the puppet ancestor laughed resolutely. "Come, let's die together." Crack! The moment the handle was pulled down, the giant puppet's head emitted an unprecedentedly violent explosion. This was a self-destruction mechanism that the giant puppet had designed when it was first refined. In order to prevent the giant puppet from falling into the hands of an enemy, the Abyss puppet race could use a mechanism to detonate the giant puppet's self-destruction mechanism, causing the puppet and the enemy to perish together. Through their calculations, the power of the explosion was infinitely close to the attack of a myriad saint powerhouse. Boom! The world instantly fell into a blinding white. The flames of the explosion radiated out into billions of mountains and rivers, destroying everything within its range. At the center of the explosion, all sound was swallowed up by the explosion, leaving behind only a roar that replaced everything else. The ground where the Hidden Heaven Mountain was located began to disintegrate and the nearby vegetation disappeared. In the end, even the giant puppet itself was shattered, disintegrating into particles. Somewhere, the Blueheart puppet that hadn't been able to escape in time reared its head back and roared in pain. In the impact of the explosion, its body was like a shadow in the daytime, slowly dissipating. The shock wave from the powerful explosion set off tsunami-like smoke and dust, sweeping in all directions. The creatures of the Hidden Heaven Mountain, who had been gone for half a day, stood on a mountain, looking at the red and white flames in the sky, their eyes filled with shock. In another direction, Su Yu stood silently, a complicated look in his eyes. He heaved a long sigh and said, Rest in peace. He took out the space storage device, and with a thought, the bodies of the 3 ancient sages of the Saint Puppet clan appeared in front of him. In fact, to be precise, the Saint Puppet clan hadn't been wiped out. Previously, the bodies of 3 ancient sages had been possessed by Suyu. Their bodies had been placed in the space storage device, so they hadn't died. The 3 of them were at a loss for a moment. After Suyu briefly described the situation, they looked at the red light of the explosion that had faded behind them, hugging their heads and crying bitterly. Please remember the original domain name of this book. Mobile version website. Chapter 3103. There are only 3 of you left in the Puppet Saint clan. You will be responsible for carrying forward the legacy of your ancestor before he died. Suyu handed over the legacy of the Abyss Puppet ancestor to the 3 of them. The 3 of them looked at each other, but no one took it. Instead, they bowed. Since Cauldron Master was entrusted by the ancestor, we are willing to follow Cauldron Master from now on. Today's 9-star civilization was in turmoil. If the 3 of them obtained the legacy, not only would they not be able to carry forward the Abyss Puppet ancestor, but they would also be targeted by many powerful evil forces. Instead of that, it was better to follow Cauldron Master and slowly develop the Abyss Puppet ancestor. If you insist, I welcome you at any time. Suyu took back the scripture and said, however, you have to complete a task first. The 3 of them were delighted. Cauldron Master, please speak. Suyu flicked his fingers, and 3 lumps of light entered their minds. Everything that I wanted to say is contained within it. After Suyu spoke, he leaped into the air and left without stopping. The 3 of them were in a trance. After confirming the information in the lumps of light, they were all shocked speechless for a long time. Cauldron Master, are you serious? One of the ancient saints was stunned. The other 2 ancient saints were also shocked for a long time. This is ridiculous. Is he really on our side? Suyu's request was so shocking that they began to doubt Suyu's position. The 3rd ancient saint said, since you have chosen to join Cauldron Master, don't waver. Cauldron Master chose to sacrifice himself to distract the Blue Heart Puppet for the sake of the creatures of Sangtian Mountain. There should be no problem with his position. The other 2 ancient saints hesitated for a while and chose to believe Suyu. The 3 of them left in an instant. Amidst the crackling sounds from the burning ruins of Sangtian Mountain, a charred black object suddenly exploded, spewing out a blue fluorescent light. Those were all materials of the Blue Heart Iron. After they landed, they continued to wriggle towards a deep pit. In other directions, large and small fluorescent lights quickly rushed over and gathered in the deep pit. Puff! A pale white skeletal hand suddenly stretched out from the scorched earth. Then another hand crawled out. Then the head, then the body, and finally the whole body. Damned ant! The skeleton said resentfully. He was naturally the Blue Heart Puppet that hadn't died. At this moment, his body was covered in cracks, and most of the Blue Heart Iron had fallen off. Only a few places remained. However, the Blue Heart bead on his severed arm was still there, attracting the gathered Blue Heart Iron to the surface of his body. Not long after, the Blue Heart Golem recovered. Apart from his empty right arm, he glanced sideways at his right arm, his eyes filled with killing intent. Little bastard, you've done me a lot of harm. His torch-like eyes swept across the sky, and at the same time, he found a group of creatures from the Sangtian Mountain and Suyu. The 2 were in the opposite direction. He had the intention to catch up with Suyu and kill all the creatures on the Sangtian Mountain. However, if he did that, he was afraid that he would never be able to catch up with Suyu. Although he knew that Suyu was trying to save the creatures of the Sangtian Mountain, he had no choice but to be led by the nose by Suyu. Exterminate that little bastard first, then exterminate these ants. The Blue Heart Puppet leaped up, directly disappearing into the sky. Suyu, who was in the chicken wing, suddenly felt his chest heave violently. Did the Blue Heart Puppet catch up, or? Suyu waved his storage device, and the little skeleton, who had transformed into a fire lion, jumped out. He also felt that there was an extraordinary aura behind him that was rapidly approaching. He couldn't help but grin. "Little ancestor, do you dare to provoke some enemies that you can defeat?" The first ancestor of the Soul Saint clan hadn't been dealt with yet, and now another terrifying existence had appeared. The little skeleton couldn't imagine how Su-Yu had managed to survive until today, provoking this and that. Su-Yu said lightly, "Provoke? I'm saving myself." The little skeleton was stunned and suddenly thought of something. "Could it be that you provoked this terrifying thing in the first place to deal with the first ancestor?" Su-Yu said lightly, "Otherwise, why do you think I ran back to the Tsangtian mountain?" He had long since discovered that there was something wrong with this puppet. Otherwise, he wouldn't have returned to the Tsangtian mountain so decisively. "Oh my God! You took such a huge risk just to lure that terrifying thing out to deal with the first ancestor?" The little skeleton was incredulous. There were too many unpredictable risks. How could Su-Yu be sure that he could meet the first ancestor again before the terrifying thing behind him caught up? How could he ensure that the first ancestor and the thing behind him would fight each other? "Little master, you'd better run away quickly." The little skeleton's face changed. "You've underestimated the intelligence of two people who are suspected to be at the level of all saints at the same time." This trick of shifting the blame was a trick that those old monsters had played when they were sick of. It was a fool's dream to want to trigger a life-and-death battle between the two sides. As soon as they met, they would be able to guess that this was deliberately arranged by Su-Yu to provoke them into a fight and then reap the spoils from the sidelines. If they saw through Su-Yu's plan, would they be fooled? Su-Yu had thought too highly of these petty tricks. "I acknowledge their intelligence, but I acknowledge my own even more." Su-Yu looked up at the sky, his eyes filled with a hint of determination. The little skeleton howled, but could only grit its teeth and run for its life. But it did not have any expectations for Su-Yu's future. It sighed silently in its heart. The poor Qing emperor endured for an era, and all his efforts are going to go to waste. The Qing emperor must have trusted the wrong person. Whoosh, the two of them, one chasing the other, fled for their lives in the endless void once more. The blue heart puppet was extremely fast, not any slower than the first ancestor. It quickly closed the distance between them. The distance between them was not far. After just half a day, the little skeleton looked back and could already see the flickering blue light at the end of the world. It was about to catch up. The first ancestor in Su-Yu's plan had yet to appear. The little skeleton was sad. How could this be so accurate? The first ancestor was not his marionette. How could he appear in front of the enemy according to his plan? Finally, the blue heart puppet closed the distance again. Even from a distance, the blue heart puppet's cold laughter could be heard. "You can't run away." Su-Yu's eyes were calm. He took out the blue heart iron heart and said lightly, "First ancestor, if you don't show yourself, I'll return this heart to that monster." Swish, almost as soon as he finished speaking, his vision blurred. The first ancestor, who had been suppressed by the Heavenly Law Alliance, appeared in front of Su-Yu. Her expression was the same, but there was a hint of murderous intent in her eyes as she looked at Su-Yu, as well as a hint of fear. "Trying to trick me again?" the first ancestor said coldly. Tomorrow night watch period. Chapter 3104. She had successfully escaped from the giant net-like seal of the Heavenly Law Alliance, and was chasing after Su-Yu's aura. Who would have thought that Su-Yu would come knocking on her door? Having been tricked once, the first ancestor was naturally more cautious. She had hidden herself to see what Su-Yu was up to. In the end, she was certain that Su-Yu was plotting against her, and he actually knew that she was in the vicinity. He had even planned to shift the blame to her and trigger a fight between her and the unknown being that was chasing after her. "Your plan is really clumsy," the first ancestor said calmly. She took a step back. Not only did she not take the heart, but she also distanced herself from the conflict between Su Yu and the Blue Heart puppet. Her goal was to kill Su Yu. It made no difference whether she killed him herself or Su Yu was killed by someone else. So what if this seemingly strange heart fell into the hands of the puppet? Did it have anything to do with her? Isn't Su Yu too childish? Or, does he think that I'm a fool because he has successfully schemed against me once? She wanted to see how Su Yu would deal with the unknown being alone. Roar. The Blue Heart puppet approached quickly. It would arrive in a few breaths' time and kill Su Yu immediately. When that happened, Su Yu would not be able to last long in front of the Blue Heart puppet. His death was a foregone conclusion. At such a critical juncture, Su Yu did something that no one had expected. He threw the Blue Heart Iron Heart to the first ancestor. The first ancestor, who saw this scene from afar, shook her head slightly. Su Yu must have been driven into a corner. How could he do such a meaningless thing? She shifted her body to the void beside her, avoiding the Blue Heart Iron Heart. However, a shocking scene occurred. She had clearly moved away, but the Blue Heart Iron Heart seemed to have grown eyes and followed her. Moreover, it predicted where she would move and appeared there ahead of time. As a result, the Blue Heart Iron Heart hit the first ancestor's body. Who is it? The first ancestor swept the Blue Heart Iron Heart away with her palm and looked up into the sky, her expression grave. She was in existence at the level of all saints and had long since surpassed the scope of ordinary creatures. Her future was not something that ordinary people could predict. Unfortunately, in the empty void, no one could respond to her. What made her even more preoccupied was that she suddenly felt the back of her hand heat up. She looked down and saw that the back of her hand was actually stained with some blue fluorescence. The fluorescent light drilled into his flesh and blood, forming a faint heart-shaped pattern. Not far away, the Blue Heart Iron Heart was gradually disappearing. The first ancestor's careless attack had actually attracted the Blue Heart Iron Heart to invade his body? A glint flashed in her eyes as a destructive force of myriad saints surged out from her palm, trying to expel the fluorescent light that had invaded her body. However, the fluorescent light had already fused with his flesh and blood, becoming a part of his body. Visible to the naked eye, a blue heart pattern slowly and powerfully beat on the back of her hand. The Blue Heart Iron Heart in the air had disappeared without a trace. The heart had already been inserted into the body of the first ancestor. The first ancestor's face was extremely gloomy as she stared at Su Yu with her beautiful eyes. "Did you do all of this?" Su Yu shrugged his shoulders and said indifferently, "You think too highly of me. I haven't even reached the stage where I can predict the trajectory of an all-saint strong man. The person who is plotting against you is in the sky." He pointed to the top of his head. Without a doubt, it was none other than the Emperor of the Sacred Mountain. First Ancestor remained silent. She already knew the answer. The person who was plotting against her was indeed the Emperor of the Sacred Mountain. Only the being up there could predict her trajectory and successfully implant the Blue Heart Iron Heart into her body. However, the first ancestor was a little uncertain. "Are you in cahoots with the Emperor of the Sacred Mountain? What do you think?" Su Yu asked. The first ancestor was a little confused. If Su Yu was in cahoots with the Emperor of the Sacred Mountain, then why was Su Yu being chased by the stone men in the Heavenly Law prison? However, if not, how could Su Yu be sure that the Emperor of the Sacred Mountain would secretly attack him? Could it be that he had already predicted that the Emperor of the Sacred Mountain would definitely plot against her and force her to become enemies with the Blue Heart puppet? If that was the case, wouldn't every move of the Emperor of the Sacred Mountain be under the control of Su Yu, a human? Wasn't this too terrifying? This was the first time she had heard of someone being able to plot against the Emperor of the Sacred Mountain. Just as she was in shock and bewilderment, the powerful breath finally arrived. Looking at the blue one-armed puppet in front of her, her beautiful eyes shimmered, and she accurately identified the other party's identity. "You are the All Saints of the human race 7 eras ago, to Obalu, right?" "What?" Su Yu was secretly taken aback. He hadn't expected the blue heart puppet who was chasing him to kill him to be a strong all-saint of the human race. The blue heart puppet stopped in its tracks abruptly, its gaze fixed on the first ancestor. It hesitantly asked, "Are you from the Soul Saint clan?" Between the two of them, there was an invisible collision of auras, and they were both on guard against each other. Especially the blue heart puppet, because it sensed a hint of danger. Its body was strong and invincible, and it feared no one, but its soul was not. Coincidentally, the Soul Saint clan was its nemesis. "I've heard of your name for a long time, Tuobalu." The first ancestor sighed silently. Back then, when she was still an ordinary ancestor of the Soul Saint clan, Tuobalu was already a famous hero of the human race. Afterward, for some unknown reason, Tuobalu disappeared from the Nine-Star civilization. Unexpectedly, when they saw him again, he had already been refined into a puppet. The changes of the world were really unexpected. The blue heart puppet was also filled with emotion. "I didn't expect that there would still be someone in this world who remembers me," Tuobalu. Haha, it laughed, its gaze falling on the back of the first ancestor's hand. "Can you return that heart to me? It is very important to me." The first ancestor had no intention of fighting to the death with Tuobalu. She was exceptionally straightforward. "Sure. However, it is a little special, and it seems like I can't take it off." The blue heart puppet nodded and took half a step forward. "I have a way to deal with it, and that is for you to die." The blue heart puppet, who was still sighing with emotion just a moment ago, suddenly had an ominous glint in its eyes. It ordered the killer to attack immediately. A blue beam of light shot out from its eyes, piercing through the space at an unbelievable speed, and reached straight for the first ancestor's body. The first ancestor blinked nonchalantly. "I knew you were up to no good." Her body, which was struck by the blue beam of light, instantly shattered and turned into powder. The blue heart puppet's expression changed. Illusion technique? Even Su Yu could use the Soul Saint clan's illusion technique to perfection, let alone the first ancestor. Swish. Not far away, the first ancestor's figure reappeared. Her expression was slightly cold, and she was a little angry and helpless. She didn't want to become enemies with the blue heart puppet for no reason, but now it seemed like she had no other choice. "Before we fight, can you get rid of this annoying human first?" The first ancestor naturally didn't forget about Su Yu. She didn't want Su Yu to be able to reap the benefits from the side. The blue heart puppet looked at Su Yu and grinned eerily. "Of course. If it weren't for Su Yu, the little brute, meddling, the blue heart iron heart would have long since fused into its body. How could it have ended up in this situation? /book_2063/Lgenius 1 second remembered website address. Mobile version. Chapter 3105. The two 10,000 saints stared at Su Yu at the same time. They had reached an agreement to kill Su Yu first. The first ancestor looked at him mockingly. "Why, did you foresee that we would kill you first? Wasn't Su Yu able to trick even the Saint Mountain's emperor? Then, did he foresee his own end?" Unexpectedly, Su Yu's face was calm, and he said with an indifferent attitude, "So be it. It's not my real body anyway." "What?" The blue heart puppet was shocked, looking at the first ancestor. His soul was no longer what it used to be, and he could not tell whether Su Yu was real or not. However, the first ancestor was an elder of the Saint clan. Could she not tell? The first ancestor's eyes flashed, and the next moment, she appeared in front of Su Yu, patting his shoulder lightly. The next moment, Su Yu disappeared like smoke. It was indeed Su Yu's soul illusion technique. The first ancestor sighed helplessly. "His soul ancestral technique is higher than mine." Although she was unwilling to admit it, Su Yu was indeed the only person in the last 10 eras who had successfully cultivated the soul ancestral technique. She had only cultivated 80% of it, and there was still the other 20% that she could not succeed in. Therefore, if Suyu had used the soul ancestral technique, she would not have been able to tell if he was real or not. This cunning bastard! The blue heart puppet was filled with hatred. It had just been born and thought that it could return to the world and dominate the universe, but it had been tricked by this junior of the same clan. The first ancestor scanned the surroundings with her beautiful eyes, hoping to find Suyu. The blue heart puppet waved its hand wearily. There is no need to look for him. Since he wants to reap the benefits of others, he must have hidden himself well. The blue heart puppet, who had fought with Suyu several times, no longer wanted to waste its energy on him. The most important thing now was to obtain the blue heart iron heart, so that it could become a complete puppet. Although this body was strong, it had a fatal weakness. Ordinary people might not be able to do anything to it, but it would be quite dangerous if it encountered a peerless expert. For example, the first ancestor in front of him. After she withdrew her gaze, she looked thoughtfully at the blue heart puppet's damaged chest, as well as the faintly discernible blue heart pearl where its broken arm was. Other than killing me, is there no other way to take out the Blust heart? The first patriarch lifted his wrist, where the mark of the Blust heart pulsed. The blue heart puppet's body was covered in a layer of faint blue light, and it said helplessly, "If I said I did, would you believe me?" First ancestor shook his head. Of course he didn't believe it. Just then, the blue heart puppet had used its sneak attack to tell her that only by killing her would the blue heart iron heart drop. Then what else is there to say? Shall we fight to the death? The blue heart puppet said gravely. First ancestor sighed and frowned. I really don't want to fight, especially when I'm being schemed against. She was in a terrible mood. She knew that she had been tricked into a fight to the death, but she had no choice but to carry it out. She was disgusted by this kind of overt plot. Then, I'll make my move against you. The blue heart puppet had no choice but to take the initiative to attack. The blue light on its body transformed into a tsunami that howled towards the first ancestor. First ancestor remained calm. She spread her fingers and an invisible soul net appeared in front of her, blocking the blue light. At the same time, two corporeal rays of light flashed through her eyes. The blue heart puppet groaned. Its soul was intensely stimulated, but it gritted its teeth and endured. The blue light in front of it suddenly expanded and rushed over with overwhelming force, wrapping around the first ancestor. But since the first ancestor was a 10,000 saint expert, how could she so easily crystallize? She flicked her 10 fingers, each flick opening up a space. After flicking her 10 fingers, she had already pierced through the tsunami. No matter how much the tsunami struck her, it couldn't harm her at all. The battle between the two had only just begun. The real battle was yet to come. First ancestor decisively used a soul ancestral technique. A beautiful mark curled around her fingertip, carrying with it a thick Tao of the soul. In that instant, it was like a yellow spring that carried billions of souls surged over. The blue heart puppet laughed. Good. This is the first time I've returned to this world that I'm fighting a serious battle. With a stroke of her index finger, she also displayed an ancestral technique. Although that ancestral technique wasn't as profound as the soul ancestral technique, it was extremely complete. It wasn't much weaker than the incomplete soul ancestral technique of the first ancestor. The two soul ancestral techniques collided in the air. Boom! Boom! The entire void was turned upside down. The nearby space was in chaos, and time was flowing in reverse. Far away, Suyu, who was sitting cross-legged in a galaxy, was affected by the battle between the two 10,000 saints. The galaxy beneath Suyu's feet flowed rapidly, colliding and annihilating each other. His robe fluttered wildly as he looked at the great battle at the end of the world. His heart yearned. Is that the battle of the 10,000 saints? If he reached that level one day, there wouldn't be many places in the entire 9-star civilization that could stop him, right? He clenched his fists. He was even more determined to obtain the legacy of the human ancestor. The heavenly road. He had to climb the heavenly road, reach the end of it, and become the second human ancestor since ancient times. No, he had to surpass the former human ancestor. No matter how strong the human ancestor was, he was still defeated by the Emperor of the Holy Mountain. If he wanted to surpass the Holy Mountain, he had to surpass the former human ancestor. He waited silently. The battle between the two sides lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. In those 3 days, Suyu had retreated 10 times, each time a distance of trillions of mountains and rivers. Their battles grew fiercer and fiercer. Especially the last time, when a world-destroying brilliance erupted, the shock wave engulfed the entire cloud-desolate territory. Apart from strong men like Suyu, most of them died in their battles. What was reflected in Suyu's eyes was a scorched land with no signs of life. The cloud-desolate territory had been completely destroyed. This was the battle between the 10,000 saints. However, after the last blow, the whole world returned to peace. The winner of the battle between them must have been decided. Suyu stood up, took out a jade pendant, and sent a message to the 3 ancient saints he had instructed. After doing this, he rode on the little lion and rushed to the center of the battle. The closer he got to the center, the more he could feel the destruction. Waves of destructive energy reverberated in the air, strangling the remaining energy in the atmosphere. Billions of mountains and rivers away from the center of the battle, there was not even the slightest trace of spiritual energy, let alone path energy. Moreover, Suyu and the little skeleton had to protect themselves with the power of the heavenly law master to move forward. Otherwise, they would have been killed by the chaotic flow of destructive energy. After moving forward with great difficulty, they finally arrived at the center of the battle. In an area that was almost empty, the first ancestor was lying on the ground, and the blue heart puppet was standing where it was. Suyu sighed silently. It was the first ancestor who had fallen. He was a little surprised, and he felt a little sorry for the Soul Saint tribe. If Suyu had not appeared, perhaps the Soul Saint tribe would not have lost a pillar like the first ancestor. However, the next moment, Suyu's eyes changed slightly. This is not right. Please remember the original domain name of this book. Mobile version website. Chapter 3106. He keenly sensed that the consciousness of the blue heart puppet had dissipated into dust and ceased to exist. The little skeleton also sensed it and immediately crouched down, its 4 claws wriggling restlessly. As expected, just as Suyu had sensed, the upright blue heart puppet suddenly fell to the ground with a thud. The consciousness in its body had been completely wiped out by the first ancestor's secret soul technique. The first ancestor, who was lying on the ground, moved her fingers and sat up with difficulty. She was panting, and her youthful face was filled with deep exhaustion and weakness. She was a strong martial artist of the All Saints level, but she was only good at the soul, and her body was her weakness. Although the blue heart puppet's consciousness was weak, its indestructible body gave her a great deal of trouble. The two of them fought for several days before the blue heart puppet's consciousness was obliterated and died. She panted heavily and looked at Suyu, who had appeared. Her eyes were wide open and full of annoyance. I've lived for so long, and I never thought I would be tricked by a junior. This time, her body was seriously injured and would need hundreds of years of isolation to recover. She had to admit that she had suffered a great loss. Moreover, she had not gained anything from this battle. She had just been engaged in a life-and-death battle for no reason. Suyu shrugged and said calmly, "You flatter me." In front of his chest, a bright oil lamp appeared, and the mature body of the sacred mortal body appeared. As soon as his figure appeared, it blotted out the sky and covered billions of galaxies. The figure grabbed the blue heart puppet from the Dishon mountain and put it into Suyu's space storage device. The first ancestor stood up with difficulty, her messy hair unable to conceal her stubborn eyes. "You want to kill me? You're not strong enough." She wanted to reap the benefits? That would depend on the strength of this fisherman. Even though she was seriously injured, She was not someone Su Yu could covet. Su Yu walked over with his hands behind his back. At this moment, shouldn't you be humbling yourself and trying to mend the relationship between us? Su Yu was strong and she was weak. If you want to fight, let's fight. There's no need to feign civility. The first ancestor was an ancient and powerful being. How could she lower herself to a human who was not even an ancient saint? Su Yu chuckled. What an honest woman, I like it. However, Su Yu's face was shrouded in the shadow of the giant figure, making him look merciless and ruthless. However, my rationality tells me that I need to eliminate the roots of the weed. He had already offended the first ancestor to the point where he wouldn't rest until one of them was dead. In the future, either he or the first ancestor would die. If the first ancestor was spared today, when the first ancestor recovered from his injuries tomorrow, Su Yu would die. Hence, Su Yu could not be merciful. Even though he did not hate the first ancestor too much, he did not hate the first ancestor. Then come. The first ancestor struggled to her feet. She gritted her teeth and vowed to fight to the death. But before we fight, I want you to answer a question. The first ancestor said, can you predict the future, or have you calculated it? I'm saying that the sacred mountain's Son of Heaven will interfere in the fight for the Blue Heart Iron Heart. Su Yu's expression was calm as he replied, of course I will. Why would he assign the 3 ancient sages of the sacred puppet tribe to carry out a mission that even they were extremely suspicious of? That was because the mission was to send a message to the Stone Man Hall for the remnants of the Cloud Desolate Territory's human ancestor to appear. The Golem Hall would not underestimate this news. They would definitely inform the higher-ups immediately, and the sacred mountain would eventually learn of it. Their wills would descend upon this area, so it was normal for them to discover that the Blue Heart Iron Heart was being fought over. Moreover, with the Holy Mountain's past actions, they could not wait for the remaining experts of the 9-star civilizations to wither away. Only then could they ensure that the Holy Mountain's foundation would not be destroyed. Thus, it was to be expected that the sacred mountain Son of Heaven would secretly make a move to incite a war between the first ancestor and the Blue Heart puppet. The human race is truly a wondrous race. First ancestor sighed with emotion. She had lived for nearly 10 eras, and in almost every era, she had witnessed a human almighty being who could shake time and space. Even further away, there was a 10,000 saints expert who was even more ancient than her, the Blue Heart puppet's consciousness to Obalu. More recently, there was the famous human ancestor, who surpassed all the great figures of the human race. And this epoch was the most desolate era for the human race. Perhaps it was because of the emergence of world-shaking human powerhouses one after another that the sacred mountain's Son of Heaven intentionally suppressed the luck of the human race. Up until now, there had not been a single powerful human almighty. But now, the first ancestor had changed his mind. It was not that the human almighty had not appeared, but that he had always been around. It was the first time in 10 eras that she had heard of someone who could even scheme against the sacred mountain's Son of Heaven. You flatter me, Su Yu said lightly as he confronted the first ancestor from afar. A great battle was about to break out between the two sides. It was only a matter of who would make the first move. The little skeleton was also extremely nervous. A starving camel was still bigger than a horse, and no one could say for sure whether Su Yu would come out on top, or the first ancestor would have the upper hand. Just as the two sides were facing each other, a sudden shadow of light streaked across the space and time, heading straight for them. It was the shadow of a giant ruler that spanned the heavens and the earth, and its entire body was in 9 colors. The moment it appeared, it shook the void, and the cloud desolate territory, which had already been scorched, turned into nothingness under its pressure. Under the shadow of the ruler, all things were reduced to nothingness. Su Yu's pupils shrank, but he was not surprised. The Emperor's ruler. The clone of Emperor Xiaoyao had once held a replica of the Emperor's ruler, and Su Yu had experienced its power. Compared to the replica, the real Emperor's ruler's power was more than 10 times greater. I've been waiting for this strike for a long time. Since Su Yu dared to attract the attention of the Saint Mountain's Emperor, how could he not have foreseen that the Saint Mountain's Emperor would leave behind a trick to kill them? In a flash, Su Yu opened his mouth and spat out a mass of liquid that floated above his head. It was none other than Su Yu's lifelong possessions, condensed into liquid. It was used to forge a new divine 9-dragon cauldron. Clang! Su Yu pointed with one hand, and the mass of liquid flew up into the sky and quickly spread out, turning into a rippling water skin that shrouded the sky. The shadow of the ruler came slashing down, bombarding the water skin. Idiot! That was an attack from Emperor Xiaoyao himself. How could you resist it? The first ancestor murmured in despair, even losing the will to resist. If she was at her peak, she could still resist a little, but now that she was seriously injured, she could not muster much strength, so how could she face the attack head-on? However, to the first ancestor's surprise, the water skin actually absorbed the power of the ruler's shadow after shaking violently for a while. With that, the water skin became thicker. Su Yu saw it and nodded to himself. He dared to attract the Saint Mountain's Emperor because he was confident that he could face their world-destroying attack. This liquid was his trump card. He had accidentally discovered that this liquid could contain anything, even attacks. However, he was not too sure if the Saint Mountain's Emperor's attack could be withstood. Now that he tried, it worked. Although I really want to kill you, it seems that now is not the time, Su Yu said regretfully. As soon as he finished speaking, the giant shadow carried Su Yu and the little skeleton and rushed across the sky. He had to leave this place before Emperor Xiaoyao himself arrived. Chapter 3107. Swoosh. However, as soon as Su Yu left, the first ancestor turned around and followed Su Yu. Split up. Otherwise we will all die. Su Yu frowned. If the two of them split up, the Emperor of Xiaoyao wouldn't be able to pay attention to two places, and one of them might be able to survive. However, if they stayed together, it would give Prince Xiaoyao a chance to kill them both. The first ancestor passed the little skeleton in a flash and said, "No. You have a treasure that can absorb Prince Xiaoyao's attack, and I have the movement technique of the 10,000 saints. If we work together, we will have a chance to survive. Otherwise, the chances are slim. The 10,000 saints are unfathomable, and Prince Xiaoyao is even more so. Don't expect to survive if we split up." Su Yu looked helpless and sighed heavily. "Alright. Let's reconcile for now. Deal." In the face of life and death, they chose to cooperate. The first ancestor could not help but feel proud. No matter how Su Yu planned, he had to adopt her plan because of the situation. However, what she did not notice was that Su Yu's lips curled into a meaningful smile, which quickly disappeared before the first ancestor looked at him. The little skeleton sensed something. He stuck out his tongue and secretly said, "Young master, don't tell me you're plotting something again?" Su Yu smiled without saying a word. Of course, he had a plan. How could someone as shrewd as Su Yu not know that when facing Prince Xiaoyao, splitting up was useless? The best way was to unite with the first ancestor. Only then would there be a greater chance. However, if Su Yu had been the one to propose a truce and unite against the common enemy, would the first ancestor have agreed? With her vigilance against Su Yu, she would probably reject it immediately. Therefore, Su Yu waited for her to propose it herself. This was the reason why Su Yu had decisively left on his own, without the slightest bit of hesitation. Only then would the first ancestor be willing to stop the battle on his own. "Hold on to me." The first ancestor displayed her movement technique. Su Yu and the little skeleton looked at each other and grinned. Each of them grabbed one of the first ancestor's arms. Swoosh. The first ancestor's movement technique was extraordinary. In an instant, they disappeared from the cloud-desolate territory and moved to another territory. However, Prince Xiaoyao's targeting did not disappear because of that. After 10 breaths, Su Yu and the first ancestor were locked on by him again. A ruler shadow that transcended the stars came crashing down. Su Yu once again took out the melted liquid used to refine the divine nine-dragon cauldron and absorbed the strike. After absorbing it, the melted liquid became even purer, becoming much clearer from its initial murky state. Seeing this, the first ancestor relaxed and continued to use his movement technique. After moving for the second time, Emperor Xiao Yao's gaze locked onto them again after 100 breaths. The third time, the fourth time, the fifth time, every time they moved, it would take longer for Emperor Xiao Yao to find them again. After moving for 100 times, Emperor Xiao Yao spent a whole day to find them again. First ancestor gritted his teeth and continued to use his movement technique. In this way, both sides were practically competing in patience, and a long and drawn-out battle unfolded. 1 month later, the first ancestor was so exhausted that she had already forgotten how many times she had used her movement technique. She only knew that she was 100 times more exhausted than when she had been chasing after Su Yu. And Xiao Yao, son of heaven, had not locked onto them for more than 10 days. From the looks of it, they had managed to shake it off. Who? First ancestor finally lost all of his strength and collapsed to the ground in exhaustion. She had experienced the great battle with the Blueheart puppet and the pursuit of Son of Heaven Xiao Yao. It could be said that she was extremely exhausted. Tired. That's good. Little skeleton, tie me up. Su Yu and the little skeleton looked relaxed. Not only were they not tired, but they had also replenished their strength while they were escaping. The first ancestor opened her eyes with difficulty and showed a hint of self-mockery. As expected, she knew that she had fallen into Su Yu's trap again. However, if you want to touch me, you'd better be cautious. A spark appeared between the first ancestor's brows, and a thunderbolt-shaped mark appeared out of thin air. Looking at the mark, Su Yu felt his soul shiver, and it even showed signs of being forced out of his body. This was just the appearance of the mark. If it was activated, this is a secret technique passed down by the ancestors of the Saint Soul clan. Once it is activated, the enemy will be cursed by the bloodline of the soul for eternity. Every day, their souls will feel like they are being burned by the sun until they perish. If you don't believe me, you can try it. Of course, Su Yu believed her. He was also a soul expert, and he had a deep understanding of the secret techniques of the soul. That mark was definitely dangerous. No, it was several times more dangerous than what she had said. The little skeleton understood, and immediately said with a smile, "Ancestor, what are you thinking? What the little master means is to tie a rope for you, so that you won't be alone. We have to continue our journey, but you already have no strength left, right?" The first ancestor laughed. "Is that so? Of course, I am the mount of the Qing Emperor, after all. Lying is beneath me." The little skeleton patted his chest. Rumble! A thunderbolt fell without warning, landing right in front of the little skeleton's toes. The corners of Su Yu's mouth twitched. Even the heavenly law couldn't stand it. He felt that the little skeleton was lying. The little skeleton was embarrassed, and he couldn't help but raise his head and curse. "Damn it, I didn't swear. Why did you strike me?" The first ancestor flicked her hair and said, "Which one of you is tied to me?" Him. Su Yu and the little skeleton pointed at each other at the same time. What a joke. Who would want to be tied to this ancient woman? What if she did something to him? Wouldn't he be turned into ashes? Su Yu glared at the little skeleton. "You asked for it, so finish tying me up with tears." Really, the little skeleton's excuse wasn't very good. The first ancestor said lazily, "I hope you can carry me on your back." Her beautiful eyes were fixed on Su Yu, and there was a meaningful look in her eyes. Su Yu waved his hand. "Forget it, you and I are both 1,000-year-old foxes. Why are we talking about strange stories? We both know what we are up to, so there is no need to lie to each other." Su Yu knew what the first ancestor wanted to do. She wanted to do something to prevent Su Yu from attacking her when she was weak. We are not in a good situation now, so it is better not to kill without permission. Su Yu looked at the sky warily. The first ancestor agreed. Yes, it is better that way. The two hit it off, and the conflict was temporarily resolved. Su Yu looked around, and only felt that the space here was a little dreamy, hazy, and unreal. Where is this? The nine-tailed emperor realm, the first ancestor said lightly. Su Yu's heart skipped a beat. The nine-tailed emperor should be the first emperor he had come into contact with, but it was just a body. Seeing that there was no one around, and the first ancestor needed to rest, Su Yu found a safe place. He also needed to study the blue heart puppet that he had just obtained. This puppet was a peerless treasure,